Welcome back. You night owls, tonight we wander into a city that smells of coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and cheap gin. The year is somewhere in the middle of the Georgian century, and the streets of London seem to tremble under the weight of their own heartbeat. Lamps sputter in the mist, the cobblestones glisten with yesterday's rain, and every shadow hides either a beggar or a drunk. You can almost feel the sticky residue beneath your shoes as you step across Gin Lane, the infamous strip where even the rats look hungover. You're not here as a tourist, of course. You're part of this restless crowd, trudging through an age that somehow manages to be both elegant and filthy at once. Above you, the silhouettes of new Georgian terraces rise like polished tombstones of ambition behind their windows. The wealthy sip imported wine. Down here, though, you can buy gin for less than a loaf of bread. And that, dear listener, is precisely where our story begins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You draw your cloak tighter as the fog rolls in from the Thames. The air tastes faintly metallic, a reminder of the forges and tanneries grinding through the night. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries, though it's hard to tell whether it's from hunger or the echo of some tavern song distorted by the alley walls. Every few paces, a sign swings overhead, a wooden board painted with crude images of juniper berries or cherubic drunks. Drunk for a penny, dead drunk for twopence, one reads cheerfully. You realize, with a slight shiver, that it's not a joke. The gin craze is in full bloom, and London has become its experiment in oblivion. Between 1720 and 1750, the city's population has doubled, but clean water hasn't. Small beer, the traditional weak ale, once considered safer than water, is too costly for the poor. So people turn to gin, clear, fiery, and suspiciously easy to make. Parliament had opened the floodgates decades earlier, allowing distillation without license fees to encourage grain consumption. The result? An ocean of cheap spirits. You watch an old woman stumble from a doorway, clutching a clay bottle. Her apron is crusted with filth, her hair tangled into ropes. She tilts the bottle toward her mouth and laughs, a high, broken sound that rings like cracked glass. Then she collapses onto the cobblestones, still laughing, her skirt catching the orange flicker of a tallow lamp. This is London's beating heart tonight. Not the theaters, not the polished drawing rooms, but this gutter-slick chorus of souls, numbed by juniper and despair. If you keep walking west, you'll find Hogarth's Gin Lane brought to life. The artist's etching hasn't yet become famous, but you can already sense the tableau it will freeze forever. Mothers neglecting infants, apprentices pawning tools for drink, and skeletal men gnawing on bones in the shadow of a collapsing tenement. It's almost as if the city itself has drunk too deeply. What's peculiar is how ordinary it all feels. A gin shop might stand beside a bakery, a church steeple rises above a brothel, and in between, someone plays a tin whistle that sounds oddly cheerful. You step past a barber's pole leaning drunkenly outside a doorway where gin is sold in chipped cups straight from the window. The barkeep doesn't even look up, he just sloshes another ladleful into your hand. No glass, no ceremony, just a mouthful of fire to warm your belly and loosen your misery. The taste surprises you, sweet, almost floral, yet harsh enough to make your throat sting. You cough, tears springing to your eyes, and someone nearby chuckles. First one always bites back, he says. His teeth are a ruin of brown stumps. There's something hypnotic about the simplicity of it all. One coin, one sip, forget. Some historians call this period the Great Unbuttoning, a time when social order slipped loose under the intoxicating promise of forgetfulness. London's poor had endured plague, war, and grinding taxes. Gin offered both medicine and rebellion. Drunk for a penny wasn't just a slogan. It was liberation from cold, hunger, and hopelessness. You pass a narrow courtyard where a woman sings lullabies to a bundle that may or may not contain a child. The melody is soft and sweet, but the words twist into slurs before fading away. Behind her, a painted sign declares, "Sober is boring." You smirk despite yourself. Apparently marketing was alive and well in the 1730 seconds. A mainstream truth is this. By mid-century, Londoners were consuming millions of gallons of gin each year. The official numbers, roughly 11 million gallons by 1751, sound impossible until you see it with your own eyes. Every lane hides another still, every home another jug. The spirit seeps into daily life like damp through brickwork. But there's a stranger rumor too, whispered as you walk. Some distillers, desperate to stretch profits, mix their gin with sulfuric acid or turpentine to fake strength. The result can blind, burn, or kill. The government knows, of course, but corruption flows smoother than justice. You taste bitterness not just from the gin, but from the realization that even ruin can be profitable. And though experts now debate whether the death tolls were exaggerated by moral reformers, few doubt that thousands died or were maimed. The real debate, oddly enough, isn't about whether gin destroyed lives, but whether it was inevitable. Historians still puzzle over the same question. Was this just the growing pain of an industrial nation, or a uniquely British collapse of restraint? You turn a corner into what might be the market by Street Giles. The smell hits you first: rotting vegetables, human waste, and the faint tang of spilled alcohol fermenting in the gutter. Vendors shout half-heartedly about cabbages and eels, their eyes glassy from drink. Somewhere in the chaos, a preacher's voice rises above the din. "Repent," he cries, brandishing a worn Bible. "Gin is the devil's milk." No one listens. A boy tosses an empty bottle that shatters at the preacher's feet, and the man's words vanish into the laughter of the crowd. It's almost funny, in a tragic sort of way. You can't help thinking that if the devil did have milk, it would probably taste like this: sweet, burning, and addictive. You find yourself wondering who first thought this was a good idea to distill corn and juniper into escape itself. Perhaps they meant well. Perhaps they simply wanted warmth. The irony, of course, is that gin was once considered medicinal. Dutch soldiers had drunk Genever for courage. Dutch courage, they called it, and English troops brought the taste home after the wars. What began as a tonic for bravery became a salve for despair. It's strange how easily medicine becomes vice when left unattended. As the night deepens, you notice a certain rhythm to the streets. The cries of vendors fade. The laughter turns ragged. Somewhere, a violin begins to play slow, almost mournful. A couple dances in the glow of a lantern, their shadows weaving together like smoke. For a moment, you forget the filth, the sickness, the hunger. It's almost beautiful, this defiance. Then, from the alley, a scream. Not loud, just sharp enough to slice the air. The dancer flinches, then steadies himself with another swig. Life goes on. It always does. A nearby cart rattles past, carrying barrels toward the docks. Each one is stamped with a crown emblem, proof that the distiller has paid the excise tax. But you've already learned that most barrels never see such stamps. Illicit gin flows through the veins of the city like unrecorded sin. You lean against a lamppost and watch as a man offers to trade a dead rat for a drink. The barkeep shrugs and agrees. A fair bargain, apparently. You wonder, half amused, half horrified, how civilization manages to survive itself. It's easy to imagine that the whole city is drunk, but that's not quite true. The wealthy still drink their claret and brandy. The clergy sip fortified wines. Gin belongs to the desperate, the washerwomen, the sailors, the apprentices, whose pay barely covers rent. Yet, somehow, it's these forgotten classes that give London its pulse. You cross a bridge slick with rain and spot the outline of St. Paul's Cathedral glowing faintly in the distance. Its dome stands serene, untouchable, like a reminder that not everyone has drowned in juniper. The bells toll the hour midnight. You realize you've been walking for hours, following nothing but sound and smell, as if the city itself were leading you deeper into its secret heart. Somewhere near the wharf, you pass a makeshift shelter, a half-collapsed shack patched with rags and rope. Inside, a dozen figures huddle around a sputtering candle. One woman crochets by instinct rather than sight. Another mutters nursery rhymes between hiccups. A man snores beside them, his arm draped protectively over a dog that may or may not still be breathing. You pause, uncertain whether to pity or envy their oblivion. A child stirs, lifts her head, and meets your gaze. Her eyes are startlingly clear. "You got any?" she asks. You shake your head. She shrugs and lies back down. "Didn't think so." The irony isn't lost on you. In a city obsessed with Enlightenment Newton's laws, Handel's oratorios, and polite society's coffeehouse debates, the masses find their illumination at the bottom of a gin bottle. Progress and paralysis, side by side. You recall hearing that even the Prime Minister once joked about gin as a necessary evil for the common people. Necessary, Perhaps because it kept them quiet. Drunk workers don't riot, at least, not until the gin runs out. There's a sort of grim efficiency to the whole thing. Cheap grain from the countryside, distilled in backyards, sold on every corner, the supply chain of sorrow. You could almost admire it if it weren't so heartbreaking. You rest beside the steps of an alehouse converted into a gin palace, its wooden facade painted to look like marble. Inside, light spills across the street, through frosted glass, etched with cherubs. The chatter is constant laughter, arguments, flirtation, all blurring into a single buzzing hum. A fiddler plays near the fire, his bow trembling slightly. In the far corner, a woman tells fortunes for a sip. You slip closer, listening as she traces lines on a man's palm. "You'll marry rich," she says, "but you'll die poor." The man roars with laughter and orders another round. You can't help but smile. There's humor even in despair, London's eternal talent for irony. Outside again, the air feels colder. The moon peeks through the fog, casting pale light on the street. You notice that the same faces keep appearing. The same hawkers, beggars, drinkers, circling like moths around a flame that never goes out. It dawns on you that this is not just addiction, it's a ritual. Every swig a prayer, every hangover a confession. A scholar might later call this period an urban baptism by alcohol. You see it differently, a mass dream shared by millions, each bottle another chapter in the same fevered story. The dream has its prophets too, pamphleteers, preachers, and moralists who warn that gin will end the world. Yet even they can't deny the strange vitality it brings. You catch yourself thinking, maybe this chaos is the cost of becoming modern. Maybe a nation must stagger before it learns to walk upright. Still, as the first light of dawn breaks over the rooftops, the illusion begins to fade. The drunks slump against doorways, the vendors sweep up broken glass, and the Thames carries away another night's sins. You feel a strange sympathy for this city so brilliant and so broken, so eager to forget its own brilliance. Somewhere, a rooster crows. The gin palaces close their shutters. The streets grow quiet, save for the soft trickle of rain down a gutter. You take one last look at Gin Lane. The lamps are extinguished, the laughter gone. But the smell remains a sweet, smoky ghost that will haunt London for a century. And you realize, as you turn away, that this story isn't really about drink at all. It's about hunger, the kind that no meal or sermon or law can satisfy. Hunger for warmth, for escape, for anything that dulls the ache of being alive in an age that asks too much and gives too little. You exhale, tasting the faint bitterness of juniper on your tongue. The morning light feels merciful, like forgiveness you don't quite deserve. But the day is young, and the city is stirring again. Somewhere nearby, someone uncorks another bottle. History, it seems, is just another round. You wake to the scrape of wooden shutters and the chorus of coughing that always begins the day in Georgian London. The sun hasn't yet clawed its way through the soot-colored clouds, but the alleys are already alive. Someone yells for bread. Someone else is singing badly about a lover lost to gin. A church bell tolls 6 times, slow and hollow. And you realize the city doesn't so much wake up as sober, just enough to start again. You shuffle through the crowd of costermongers, wheeling barrows of onions and eels toward Covent Garden. The smell is somewhere between brine and rot. Beside them walks a line of women in torn shawls, each balancing a tin pail meant for milk. Yet instead of stopping at the dairyman's stall, they drift toward a narrow doorway, where a wooden spoon nailed to the lintel serves as the universal sign for gin. Inside, a smoky room glows like a furnace. Copper jugs gleam, coins clink, and laughter sharp and weary ripples through the haze. You follow them in. A matron with a face like a dried apple ladles clear liquor into mugs, splashing half of it onto the counter. "Morning measure, love?" she asks, as if offering tea. You nod before your better judgment catches up. The drink scalds your throat, fills your stomach with heat, and numbs your toes all in one swallow. Around you, babies cry in slings while their mothers exhale gin breath over them. A few of the women are pregnant. A few hold infants barely able to lift their heads. Everyone drinks. They call it mother's ruin, though few can afford the luxury of irony. Gin is breakfast, anesthesia, consolation. It's easier to sip than to hope. You watch a young woman, hardly 16, pour a thimbleful into her child's mouth to stop it screaming. The child quiets instantly, goes limp against her shoulder. She smiles, triumphant for a moment. "You want to say something?" But what words would help? Outside, a peddler shouts about fresh pies, mostly crust, little meat. The women stumble back into the street, wiping their mouths, gossiping about husbands who vanished at sea or into debtors' prisons. They laugh too loudly, as if daring the world to judge them. You trail behind, your head buzzing from the gin and the sheer resilience it represents. By 8 a.m., the workhouses open their doors. Those who can still stand line up for a day's labor scrubbing floors, picking oakum, anything that buys supper. Others simply drift toward Street, Giles, or Whitechapel, where another dram waits behind every shutter. The city's pulse quickens with every gulp. A mainstream fact. By 1735, 1 in every 6 houses in London is licensed or unlicensed to sell gin. The drink costs less than a pint of beer, and it doesn't spoil. Wages have stagnated, bread prices rise, and the ale brewers have grown greedy. For the poor, gin isn't temptation. It's survival disguised as oblivion. You pass a chimney sweep no older than 10, black from head to heel. He holds a small bottle wrapped in rags. When he sees your look, he grins through soot-white teeth. Keeps the dust down, he says, before taking a swig. He isn't joking. Gin loosens the throat, dulls hunger, wards off cold. The doctors, such as they are, recommend it for nearly everything from stomach cramps to melancholy. That's the twisted humor of the age. Vice and remedy share the same bottle. Near Fleet Ditch, you find the gin courts, a maze of tenements, where entire families rent corners of rooms. Smoke seeps through the cracks of warped boards. Every step sends rats scurrying. A woman leans from an upstairs window, emptying a chamber pot that splashes dangerously close to your boots. Mind yourself, she cackles. Then she takes a drink straight from a blue bottle. A man sprawled against the wall beside her door mutters scripture between hiccups. He was once a dock porter, someone tells you. Lost his job, lost his wages, lost his way. You glance around. There must be hundreds like him. Historians still dispute whether the notorious image of mothers letting infants tumble from their arms while they drank was propaganda or portrait. Some argue that moral reformers exaggerated. Others insist that the streets themselves tell the truth better than any pamphlet. You can't decide which is worse, that the horror might have been real or that people needed to invent it. Either way, the nickname sticks. Mother's Ruin. A cruel poetry the city seems proud of. You reach the market again just as the church clock strikes 9. The gin shops are busier than ever. Sailors trade buttons, maids pawn their aprons, soldiers spend half their pay before marching off. You spot a preacher handing out leaflets titled, "The Cry of the Poor," warning that gin will dissolve the very fabric of English virtue. No one takes one. Instead, someone slips a tin token into your palm, an advertisement stamped with a smiling cherub, and the words, "King Gin, cures all." You turn it over. The other side reads, "Ask for Jenny's blessing." A joke, you suppose, or maybe not. The drink has its saints now. Somewhere behind you, a fight erupts. 2 washerwomen claw at each other over a debt of a few pennies. Their screams slice through the morning noise. A constable intervenes too late. One collapses against the wall, bleeding from her temple. The crowd stares for a heartbeat, then returns to its business. Tragedy has become as common as fog. You wander toward the river to clear your head. Along the embankment, barrels of grain wait to be milled into the next batch of despair. The smell of malt mingles with sewage and tar. You imagine the entire city floating on a tide of gin London as one enormous still, distilling misery into money. And yet, there's something oddly theatrical about it. Even ruin here comes with flair. The poor dress their sorrow in laughter. The drunkard dances before he falls. A group of women passing by begins to sing a ballad. Gin for the baby, gin for the bride, gin for the hangman's tongue inside. What it not house 4121. The rhyme is nonsense, but the rhythm sticks in your ears like a curse you can't quite shake. You pause at a water pump, watching a mother struggle to fill her bucket. Her hands tremble so badly that half the water spills onto the cobbles. Her child, barefoot and dirty, tries to help, but she slaps him away. "Go beg a farthing," she hisses. "We need gin more than water." He runs off, and she slumps against the pump handle, muttering to herself. It's in moments like this you realize that addiction isn't a moral failing, it's an economy. Breweries, landlords, and even churches profit from it. Some parishes collect gin as tithe payments. Others distribute it at festivals, calling it spirituous charity. The line between salvation and stupor blurs until you can't tell which is which. You think of Hogarth's Beer Street, all cheerful artisans and rosy cheeks painted as a deliberate contrast to Gin Lane. The message was simple. English beer builds, foreign gin destroys. Yet many brewers themselves sell both, hedging their bets. Hypocrisy, you muse, pairs well with juniper. By noon the city has fully awakened. The sun bounces off puddles of last night's rain, turning them into small mirrors where you catch glimpses of faces. Hollow eyes, cracked lips, smiles that don't reach the pupils. A carriage rattles past, spraying mud onto beggars who don't bother to move. From inside, a powdered lady lifts her veil to stare at them, then lowers it quickly, as if poverty might be contagious. You follow her gaze toward the workhouse gate. A line of women waits for admission, their children clinging like shadows. Admission means shelter and food, but also confinement, labor, humiliation. A few hesitate, glance toward the nearest gin shop, then step out of line, choice made. It's easy to judge them from a distance. Harder when you feel the wind cutting through your coat and realize that the warmth inside a gin shop costs less than a loaf of bread. A quirky account survives from a pamphlet writer who claimed that one distiller kept a monkey trained to serve customers. The creature supposedly poured measures of gin, took payment, and even refilled mugs when the landlady fell asleep. You doubt the story's truth, but it captures something essential. In a world gone mad for spirits, even beasts join the trade. You picture it, the little creature, tipping bottles with solemn precision, while humans cheer. It feels more believable than the preacher's sermons. As the afternoon darkens, you wander into a different neighborhood. Here the houses lean toward each other like conspirators. A sign painted with crude letters reads Gin Royal, best in town. Inside, a crowd presses shoulder to shoulder. A fiddler plays a jig. A woman in a torn silk dress twirls until she collapses, laughing. You notice a child asleep under the counter, surrounded by empty cups. His mother keeps serving customers, her motions automatic. When someone hands her a coin too small, she shrugs and pours anyway. The profit doesn't matter, the ritual does. Historians still argue whether this mania was born from poverty or from freedom gone feral. Was it the fault of lax laws? Or the inevitable result of people tasting independence for the first time? The question remains slippery. Like the condensation on a gin bottle, easy to touch, impossible to hold. As evening approaches, the streets change tone. The workday ends, and the laborers flood the taverns. Music rises, laughter swells, and lanterns bloom along the alleys. Children chase one another through puddles, while adults stumble arm in arm, singing off-key hymns, rewritten with obscene lyrics. You watch a group of women the same you saw at dawn, now flushed and animated, their shawls replaced with ribbons scavenged from the gutter. They dance in a circle, clapping to a rhythm no sober ear could follow. One falls, shrieking with laughter, and the others lift her up as if this collapse were part of the choreography. A passing constable glares, but doesn't interfere. The jails are already full. Besides, tomorrow morning will punish them more effectively than any court could. A church clock chimes again, echoing across the rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the river's dull roar. The night smells of smoke and citrus peels, remnants from a distiller's discarded mash. You sit on a stone step, watching the lamps flicker. Across the street, a woman cradles her child and hums a lullaby. Her voice is cracked but tender. For a moment, she could be any mother in any century. Then you notice the bottle beside her knee, and the illusion fractures. Still, when she lifts her eyes to yours, there's a strange dignity there, something that refuses pity. You look away first. The city quiets. The taverns close their shutters. The laughter drifts upward, thinning like smoke. You make your way toward your lodgings, passing doorways where figures already lie motionless. Some sleep, some don't. The line blurs under the moonlight. You can't help thinking about the term mother's ruin again. It isn't only about mothers, you decide. It's about the ruin of nurture itself, the way an entire city seems to forget how to care, to soothe, to cradle. Gin does the cradling now. And yet, beneath the despair, a pulse persists. London keeps breathing, keeps birthing, keeps drinking. Tomorrow morning the same women will queue with their pails, the same boys will climb chimneys, the same preachers will shout into the same wind. Life, stubborn and repetitive, will stagger onward. You take one last look at the alley before turning in. The fog thickens, swallowing the lamps one by one. Somewhere, a baby wails, somewhere else, laughter answers. It all sounds like a lullaby written by exhaustion. You wake again before dawn, your tongue thick with the taste of last night's gin, your head pounding in rhythm with the church bells of street martins. The world around you hums like a hangover that never ends. The city's air feels dense, full of soot, and the tang of vinegar used to mask the stench of rotting meat. Somewhere outside, a milkmaid hums a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like a dirge. You know what comes next: the queue at the gin shop, the cracked cups, the morning roar of London trying to pretend it's still alive. But today, you decide to walk further to see what happens when the cheap drink runs its course. You've seen the pleasure, now you'll meet the price. The first body you notice is not yet dead. It lies half in shadow, half in sunlight spilling from a broken shutter. A man, maybe 30, his cheeks hollowed, his coat little more than threads. His fingers twitch toward an empty bottle just out of reach. No one stops. A woman steps over him. A boy kicks the bottle aside. A cartwheel splashes him with mud. The city has learned not to look down. You keep walking. Around the corner, two men haul a stretcher piled with straw. They whistle as they go, dragging the body of some unfortunate soul toward the churchyard. Another one gone to Mother Gin, one says cheerfully. The other nods. Cheaper than the plague. You realize that death here doesn't shock anyone anymore, it's just another job to be done before breakfast. A baker opens his shutters nearby. The smell of bread drifts into the street, warm and yeasty, fighting the cold bite of dawn. You watch as a woman pauses, stares at the loaves, and counts coins in her palm. Not enough. She hesitates, then veers toward the gin shop instead. You already know how this story ends, but you follow her anyway. Inside, the air is thicker than the street. Candles gutter in the smoky gloom. The barkeep's apron is soaked dark with spilled liquor. The woman hands over a single penny and receives a tin mug filled nearly to the brim. She drinks without stopping, her throat working like someone swallowing medicine. The barkeep wipes the counter and calls for the next customer. You remember what you've read or will someday read in pamphlets. Gin is the quicker poison, but a kinder one. In a city where labor crushes the body and hunger gnaws the mind, a drink that kills softly almost feels merciful. A mainstream historical fact. By 1730, the average Londoner consumed over 2 gallons of gin a year, some much more. The government tried to stem the tide with taxes, but each new law only birthed more smugglers. In the poorest districts, gin was cheaper than milk and far easier to find. And yet, as cheap as it was to buy, it came at a dearer cost than anyone could count. You step out into the street again, blinking against the morning glare. The light feels almost hostile, stabbing through fog and grime. You follow the narrow path down toward the workhouse infirmary, where the consequences of cheap drunk pile up like rubbish. The matron greets you with a grimace. "We call it the juniper cough," she says, leading you past rows of cots. Can't say if it's the gin or the air. Likely both. The smell hits first: sour sweat, alcohol, and decay. Dozens lie groaning under thin blankets. Their eyes roll, their mouths mutter fragments of prayers or curses. One man stares at the ceiling and whispers a tune that sounds like a sailor's shanty. The matron pulls the sheet over his face mid-verse. You try not to look too closely, but it's impossible not to notice how many of them are women, young, old, mothers, daughters. Their hands tremble with withdrawal, their skin pale as candle wax. They come in sober, the matron says softly. They don't leave that way. Not alive, anyway. She shows you a ledger filled with columns of names, occupations, and causes of death. Beside one entry you see the note, "Died of gin fever." Another reads, "Infant fed spirits, in absence of milk." You close the book. The matron doesn't bother to. Outside again, the air feels fresher but no less heavy. The clatter of carts fills the street. An undertaker's boy whistles a tune as he nails a notice to a wall. Burials. Street Giles Parish. 2d a body. Beneath it, someone has scrawled in chalk, "Gin makes room for more." You can't decide if that's a warning or an advertisement. A group of apprentices passes you, laughing, tossing a bottle back and forth. One slips on the cobblestones and shatters it. "Waste of a penny," another shouts, and they all howl with laughter. Youth hasn't yet learned what age will pay for. You follow them down toward the Thames, where distillers' warehouses line the wharf. Steam rises from chimneys, carrying the scent of fermenting grain. The sound of hammers echoes as coopers seal new barrels, each one a promise of profit and pain. A quirky tidbit circulates through the crowd. Some distillers have begun flavoring their gin with exotic ingredients: coriander, orris root, angelica, turning poison into a fashion. The wealthier drinkers boast that their favorite spirit smells of botanical gardens, though it's still the same liquor beneath. London's entrepreneurs never waste a tragedy. In one warehouse, a distiller shows off his latest creation, Queen's Comfort he calls it, claiming the recipe came from Dutch alchemists. You take a sip, and it's smoother, less burn, more perfume. The crowd murmurs approval. You can almost hear the gears of commerce spinning faster than the stills themselves. Profit and pity both flowing from the same copper pipes. A preacher stands outside, shouting about judgment. His voice trembles but doesn't break. You drink yourselves to death and call it freedom, he bellows. But what freedom lives in chains of glass? A drunk heckler throws a cabbage at him. Better gin than sermons. The crowd laughs, but the preacher presses on. Mark my words, this city will drown in its own spirits. You wonder, as you watch him, whether he knows he's already too late. Historians still argue about numbers. Some say the panic was exaggerated by moralists and politicians who saw an opportunity to control the poor. Others insist the crisis was worse than anyone dared admit. Both might be right. What's certain is that by the mid-18th century, gin had become a symbol of neglect, of rebellion, of despair, dressed as pleasure. The cheap drunk was more than an individual sin, it was a collective wound, and London bled from every pore. You pause by the steps of St. Giles in the Fields. The churchyard is crowded with crooked stones and half-dug graves. A grave digger leans on his spade, wiping sweat from his brow. Can't dig fast enough, he mutters. Then, almost cheerfully, but at least they die happy, eh? You don't answer. In the afternoon, you visit the Distillers' Row. The buildings here are taller, cleaner, their owners better dressed. One man invites you inside to see his operation. Copper stills gleam like treasure, and the air hums with the rhythmic hiss of boiling mash. Efficiency, he says proudly. That's what the age demands. His no day. He pours you a measure of his best gin. 3 farthings, he adds. Cheaper than bread, stronger than hope. You take a cautious sip. It burns less than the gutter stuff you've tasted, but it leaves the same fog behind your eyes. The distiller grins, mistaking your silence for admiration. Progress, he says. We call it progress. You think of the man dying in the infirmary, the mother counting her coins, the child sleeping under the counter. Progress, indeed. Evening creeps in again. The fog thickens until the street lamps glow like dying stars. You follow the crowd toward the Gin Palace, a grander cousin of the slum shop, with mirrors and brass fittings meant to make poverty feel like luxury. Inside, the light dazzles, the music swells, and the crowd surges around the bar like worshippers at an altar. Everywhere you look, there's motion, cups clinking, laughter spilling, coins exchanging hands. The air hums with intoxication. You see a woman in fine clothes whisper something to the barkeep, who slips her a small vial instead of a mug. Laudanum opium mixed with spirits, the respectable cousin of gin. You realize, grimly, that vice wears whatever costume wealth provides. A man at your side taps your shoulder. Care for a wager? He asks. You shrug. He points to a thin fellow asleep in the corner. He's been drinking 3 days straight. 2 more and he'll see angels. You raise an eyebrow. What happens if he doesn't? The man grins. Then the angels see him first. You leave before the wager's done. Outside, the fog swirls thicker than ever, and the city seems to sigh beneath its weight. You walk past a row of shops shuttered for the night, their windows fogged with grime. A drunk soldier leans against a lamppost, singing half a verse of some marching song before vomiting at his feet. Farther along, you find a woman sitting on a stoop, cradling an empty bottle like a baby. Her dress is torn, her hair matted, her eyes glassy. You recognize her, one of the mothers from yesterday's queue. She hums softly, then murmurs, "It's all right now, he's asleep." You glance down and see only rags in her arms. You take a step back, your stomach twisting. She doesn't notice. Her lullaby continues, soft and steady, until it blends with the hum of the city. You return to your lodging long after midnight. The streets behind you pulse faintly with life, or what's left of it. From your window, you watch the river glimmer under the moonlight. Barges drift silently, carrying barrels of gin downstream, away from the city that made them famous. You imagine the journey. The spirits poured, bottled, shipped, sold again and again until the last drop meets the lips of another weary soul. The same pattern, repeated endlessly, like a mechanical prayer. London sleeps restlessly beneath it all. You think of the phrase, dear consequence, the unspoken side of every indulgence. It's not just the sickness or the death, but the dulling of spirit, the way laughter turns brittle, and music loses its melody. The cost isn't paid in coins but in color, the slow fading of life from every corner of the city. Before you drift into sleep, a last sound reaches you from the street below. A girl's voice, young and sweet, singing through the mist. Gin for a penny. Gin for two. Kiss your sorrow, bid it adieu. It's beautiful, in a haunting sort of way. You smile despite yourself, and for a fleeting moment, you understand the lure, the warmth, the forgetting, the mercy in a glass. Then the song fades, leaving only silence. And somewhere deep in that silence, London exhales half sigh, half sob. The morning fog rises thicker than usual, almost syrupy in the narrow streets, where the soot never settles. You walk through it as if wading through milk, your boots squelching in the damp filth that never quite dries. Somewhere nearby, a kettle whistles, but it's not for tea, it's for gin. The air smells faintly of scorched grain and spoiled fruit, a perfume that now defines half of London. You follow it instinctively, like a bloodhound chasing sorrow, and it leads you into the belly of the beast, the backyard distillery. There's no sign, no name, no pretense of respectability. Just a crooked gate and a flicker of orange behind warped boards. You push the door open and step inside. The room glows with firelight reflected in copper. Barrels line the walls, bubbling like witches' cauldrons. Steam hisses from pipes that look one tremor away from bursting. A boy barely 10 tends the fire with a poker, sweat dripping from his soot-blackened hair. He glances up, eyes wide and hollow, but says nothing. His master, a stout man in a stained waistcoat, waves a hand dismissively. "Keep the heat steady, lad," he growls, then turns to you. "Welcome to paradise." He means it sincerely. You edge closer to one of the stills. The liquid dripping from the spout smells sharp enough to strip paint. "Pure gin," the man declares proudly. "5 batches a day, all mine. No excise, no meddling, no king's man sniffing round here. If you might have a free verwive can friend's soul of menace to gaze on a friend a dazen, they wive of no stated his menaced persant." He hands you a cup. You hesitate but sip anyway. It tastes of fire and metal, with a ghost of juniper somewhere beneath. Your throat seizes, your eyes water. He grins. "Strong, eh? The people love it that way." You wonder if they love it, or if they simply endure it. A mainstream fact. London's bathtub distilleries mushroomed by the thousands during the height of the gin craze. Official estimates claimed more than 7,000 illegal stills operated across the city by 1735, though most historians now believe the number was higher. The government tried to tax distillation, but enforcement was a farce. Inspectors bribed, constables drunk, clerks conveniently blind. The gin itself was seldom pure. Distillers used anything fermentable grain, molasses, even spoiled bread. To mimic strength, they laced it with turpentine, sulfuric acid, and even quicklime. Some added sugar or oil of juniper to hide the taste of poison. It was chemistry without conscience. Alchemy gone domestic. You watch the distiller stir his mash with a wooden paddle. "Grain, water, a bit of courage," he says with a wink. The smell nearly makes you gag. "Don't mind the fumes, they toughen the lungs." The boy coughs violently behind him. "See, he's getting stronger already." You can't decide whether to laugh or leave. Through a back door, you glimpse the storage yard. Barrels, some leaking, are stacked haphazardly beside crates of empty bottles. Cats slink between them, their fur slick with grime. A woman ladles gin from a bucket into reused jars, once meant for jam or vinegar. She corks each one with scraps of cloth, humming softly to herself. "Doesn't that spoil it?" you ask. She laughs a dry, cracking sound. "Nothing spoils gin, love. That's the beauty of it." You want to argue, but she's right in her way. Nothing spoils gin, because gin is, by nature, already spoiled. It's the distillation of desperation, preserved in alcohol. You leave a coin on the table and step back outside. The fog has lifted slightly, revealing the rooftops like a patchwork of ash. Somewhere, a bell tolls 9 times. Another day begins, another batch of poison brewed, another crowd waiting to buy. You wander toward the wharves, where the river carries barrels like floating coffins. Dock workers roll them down, planks slick with rain. Each one bears a chalk mark, some real, some forged to indicate payment of duty. All legal, one man says with a wink, guiding a crate marked Hollands. You lift the lid. Inside are bottles labeled Geneva Spirit, Dutch gin. Imported, expensive, and ironically safer than most local batches. But the English appetite is never content with moderation. Where the Dutch drink for flavor, the English drink for escape. And escape demands volume. So the smugglers dilute, counterfeit, and multiply. You hear that some even refill old Dutch bottles with their own rough distillations and sell them to unsuspecting taverns. The deception is almost artistic. One dock worker tells you of a shipment gone wrong, a barrel that exploded mid-transport, setting fire to 3 boats. The river burned blue that night, he says with relish. Prettiest sight you ever saw. But all dan, you realize, with a shudder, that Londoners have learned to find beauty even in catastrophe. A quirky tale makes the rounds in these parts. A woman once boiled gin so long that her house filled with fumes, ignited, and burned the entire row. The locals, being practical, scooped up the pooling liquor from the gutter with cups before the fire brigade arrived. They said it was the best gin they ever tasted. Whether it's true or not hardly matters. It feels true. The distillers become folk heroes of a kind, rebels against taxation, saviors of the poor. Ballads celebrate them, preachers condemn them, and everyone else just drinks. In a society that worships both profit and pleasure, the illegal distiller stands at the crossroads, ladle in hand, smiling like a devil offering communion. You stop for a moment at a tavern, where barrels line the wall, each labeled with nicknames: Strip Me Naked, Crying Gin, Kill Devil, Madame Geneva. The last one's the most common madam, as if she were a lady of refinement rather than ruin. Patrons lift their cups and toast her name as though she were a queen. A fiddler in the corner plays a tune called The Juniper Jig. The lyrics, shouted between laughter, go something like, boil it, spoil it, drink it down, Madame Geneva rules the town, burn the throat and numb the pain, tomorrow we'll do it all again. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because the rhythm is irresistible. A man next to you explains, we sing to her so she don't kill us too quick. Does it work? You ask. He shrugs. Depends on the verse. This seems very flight, and debia safe, and will de scheme. You leave before the song ends, and make your way toward the western edge of the city, where legitimate distilleries, the respectable kind, operate behind guarded gates. Here, the air smells cleaner, the bricks newer, the workers less skeletal. A clerk greets you politely, and leads you to the owner's office. Mr. Hanwell, a man of fine waistcoat and finer hypocrisy, pours you a glass from a crystal decanter. Ours, he says proudly, is a moral gin. Distilled under license, properly filtered, taxed, and blessed by the Crown's oversight. Lisa ground. You take a sip. It's smoother than the stuff from the slums, but the difference feels superficial, like perfume dabbed on decay. Hanwell puffs his chest. We provide a safer alternative for the industrious classes. The poor will drink. It's nature. Better they drink our gin than that rubbish. Ride, minus, beasoned, plied. You ask if he worries about the consequences. He smiles. Consequences are for Parliament. Historians still debate whether the government truly wanted reform or simply control. When Parliament imposed the first Gin Act in 1729, they claimed it was to reduce drunkenness. Yet the same politicians owned shares in breweries that benefited from gin's decline. Moral panic was profitable too. Every crackdown raised prices, drove trade underground, and multiplied corruption. You imagine the city as one giant still, laws as the heat, people as the mash, money as the vapor rising from every pore. By the time it condenses into policy, it's already intoxicating. Night descends again, but you find yourself restless. You head toward the outskirts: Spitalfields, Shoreditch, the ragged fringe where city meets field. Here, the stills operate openly. Flames lick through gaps in brick walls, barrels stand cooling in ditches. You watch a group of women stirring mash in a pot big enough to drown in. One of them hums a tune. Off-key but content. "Do you sell much?" you ask. "All we make," she replies. "Sometimes more." "And no fear of the law?" She laughs. "The law drinks here same as you. You can't argue with that." A thin man with ink-stained fingers approaches, clutching a ledger. "You'll forgive me," he says nervously, "but we keep careful accounts. Efficiency keeps us invisible." He shows you pages filled with columns of numbers. Beneath them, small notes, cut with molasses, too strong add turpentine. Sell remainder to tavern at night. It's not chaos, it's industry. A quiet, deadly efficiency humming behind the illusion of poverty. You linger near the stills, watching the distillers at work. There's a rhythm to their labor, the scrape of the paddle, the hiss of steam, the pop of a cork. It's almost hypnotic. The gin trickles out clear as water, catching the firelight like liquid glass. You dip a finger and taste it again, just a drop this time. The flavor burns differently, cleaner but emptier. You imagine thousands of these droplets merging into rivers, rivers into oceans, oceans into an empire fueled by intoxication. The irony isn't lost on you. The same nation that prides itself on reason and enlightenment runs on liquor strong enough to melt pewter. In the distance, church bells toll. For whom you wonder, but the living ghosts who keep the stills alive. As you turn to leave, a spark leaps from the fire. It catches the edge of a cloth rag soaked in alcohol. The flame spreads fast. A sudden roar. The workers shout, scrambling to douse it with buckets of water, but the liquid only feeds the blaze. Within seconds, the room erupts in blue and orange fury. You dive for the door, choking on smoke. Behind you, the roof collapses with a hiss like boiling water. Someone screams a high, sharp sound cut off mid-breath. When you stumble into the street, the night sky glows with a strange beauty, the kind only disaster can paint. The neighbors gather to watch. Some cry, some cheer. One woman laughs as sparks drift upward. "God's distilling his own tonight," she says. You stand there, breathless, soot-streaked, realizing how thin the line is between creation and destruction. By morning, the fire has burned out. Only the frame remains, blackened and skeletal. A constable arrives, makes a perfunctory note in his ledger, and leaves. No arrests, no headlines, no justice. The city swallows the story before the ashes cool. You kneel beside a puddle and see your reflection smudged, hollow-eyed, almost unfamiliar. Behind it, the charred wreck of the still smolders quietly. For a moment, you think you hear laughter from within the ruins. Or maybe it's just the wind passing through broken pipes. London exhales smoke, and life goes on. Later that day, you pass a group of apprentices rebuilding the distillery already. "Can't waste good copper," one says. Another grins. "The customers won't wait." You marvel at the resilience or the madness, perhaps both. Disaster isn't an ending here, it's a delay. Like the hangover after a binge, it hurts, but never enough to stop the next drink. As you walk away, you realize the fire didn't purify anything. It simply distilled the truth. Gin isn't just a beverage, it's the city's bloodstream, pumping through every alley, every hand, every sin. You tilt your head toward the gray sky, and imagine the rising smoke curling into shapes, a woman's face, perhaps, laughing softly. Madame Geneva, undying, unrepentant, already waiting for her next batch. The morning arrives with the sound of hammers and shouts, the anthem of a city chasing profit. London smells of opportunity, and of something sour lurking underneath it. The smoke from yesterday's fires has barely cleared, yet the streets are already alive with sellers shouting the day's prices for barley, molasses, and juniper berries. You feel it the moment you step outside. The air itself seems to vibrate with ambition. Everyone wants a piece of the spirit trade. You cross through Holborn, where carters trundle past hauling barrels that clink faintly with liquid promise. The words Hollands, Geneva, and Queen's Own are painted in crude letters across their sides. It doesn't matter what's inside. Each label is an invitation to profit. Even the soot-streaked children hawking newspapers shout about fresh gin from the docks with the same zeal as if it were gold. And in a way, it is. For the first time, you begin to understand the scope of it. Gin is no longer simply a drink, it's an economy, a whole parallel system pulsing beneath official trade. Distillers, Smugglers, tavern owners, pawnbrokers, even undertakers, each feeds from the same glittering vein. A man might starve in London, but he'll never go thirsty. You wander into a side alley lined with makeshift workshops. The smell of fermenting grain clings to the air, sharp and yeasty. Men in leather aprons pour buckets of mash into wooden vats, while women bottle the finished product by hand, humming to keep rhythm. The scene feels almost industrious. If you squint, you could mistake it for honest labor. 3p a gallon, one man tells you proudly. Less than half the price of beer. That's the genius of it. He grins with teeth yellowed by smoke and neglect. Beers for the slow and stupid. Gins for the clever. Double your coin if you've got the stomach for it. You can't help admiring his audacity. He's not a villain. He's a capitalist before the word exists. The empire of intoxication grows because it's efficient. You begin to see how something as destructive as gin could become, paradoxically, a symbol of progress. A mainstream fact. By 1740, London's gin consumption surpassed 8 million gallons a year, roughly 2 pints per person per week, infants included. What started as a poor man's solace had become the backbone of the urban economy. The same politicians denouncing the devil's drink quietly invested in distilleries through shell companies. Even parish officers, meant to uphold morality, pocketed revenue from gin licenses. You imagine the city's veins as copper pipes, carrying alcohol instead of blood. At Covent Garden, a crowd has gathered around a street performer. He's juggling 3 bottles of gin, shouting verses between tosses. A dram to forget, a dram to begin. The city spins faster. We're wealthy in sin. They were dog size. End of hair flask. Coins jingle in his hat. The crowd cheers. You notice half of them are tradesmen, apprentices, hawkers, even 1 or 2 well-dressed clerks. The line between rich and poor blurs when both are drunk enough to forget it. A woman beside you leans over and mutters, "Even the king drinks Geneva. They just don't call it that." She's not wrong. While Parliament fumes about public morality, gin quietly seeps upward into the parlors of respectability. Aristocrats order imported Dutch Genever or distill their own cordials flavored with citrus and spice. The working class drinks from clay mugs, the wealthy pour from crystal. The liquid is the same, only the glass changes. A rumor passes through the marketplace that a man named Jonathan Wild, once a thief-taker, now something between a crime lord and a businessman, controls the gin routes from Whitechapel to Westminster. His men, known as spirit runners, carry bottles through the city's sewer tunnels to avoid the excise inspectors. Some say they can cross from the Tower to Soho without ever touching daylight. You can't confirm the truth, but the legend fits the times. London's underworld has found its currency. You pass a tavern owned by one of Wilde's lieutenants. Inside, the walls glitter with mirrors, a trick to make the cramped room look grander. The barkeep, a giant of a man with shoulders like oak beams, pours gin into pewter mugs from a barrel behind the counter. "A penny plain, 2p sweetened," he announces. The sweetened version, you soon discover, is gin laced with sugar and lemon peel, no safer, but it feels fancier. You sip and watch the crowd. Dock workers, washerwomen, soldiers, and pickpockets. Each laughing, shouting, arguing. For a moment, you almost admire their energy. Then you see the boy sweeping the floor collapse without warning, clutching his stomach. The laughter falters. Someone mutters, "Too much of the Queen's milk." The barkeep shrugs. He'll sleep it off. No one checks if he's breathing. By midday, you find yourself in the company of merchants, discussing supply routes, as if trading spices or tea. One unrolls a map across a tavern table. "Look here, grain from Kent, juniper from Holland, molasses from Bristol. We blend the lot and ship through the fleet. Easy as prayer." "Prayer?" Another scoffs. "Blasphemy pays better." They all laugh, and you realize that gin, for them, isn't sin but enterprise. The moralists call it the devil's work. The merchants call it diversification. Historians still argue whether the gin craze was an accident of policy or a deliberate design, a way for England to control its restless poor. Some claim the government tolerated cheap gin because it pacified the lower classes, keeping rebellion too drunk to march. Others believe the crown underestimated the chaos it unleashed. The truth likely lies, as it often does, somewhere in the fog between. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your wanderings. One enterprising woman supposedly opened a shop that sold gin by the whisper. For an extra farthing, she'd pour the drink while telling the customer a secret real or invented. Something sweet for the ears and something sour for the soul, her sign read. Her business thrived. You tried to imagine her murmuring gossip about kings and lovers while measuring poison into a cup. The combination feels perfectly Georgian, half theater, half tragedy. You catch yourself smiling at the absurdity. The city's descent has become performance art. At the docks again, ships from the Netherlands unload barrels labeled Schiedam spirits. The sailors joke that London could float on gin if the Thames ever ran dry. They might not be far from wrong. The warehouses stretch endlessly, stacked with casks sealed in pitch. The air hums with the promise of profit. You see men dipping their fingers into leaking barrels and licking them clean. One sailor, seeing your disgust, laughs. Can't waste good pay. Doesn't it burn? You ask. He grins, showing teeth like tombstones. Ain't supposed to drink it, friend. It's for cleaning brass. But who's to say brass don't need cleaning inside and out? You realize he isn't joking. By late afternoon, you wander north toward Clerkenwell, where legal distilleries tower over the slums like cathedrals. The gates gleam with royal crests. The air smells faintly of citrus and ambition. Guards in polished boots stand watch. Inside, workers in neat rows fill bottles under gaslights. The rhythm is mechanical, the precision unnerving. A foreman spots you and smiles. We're the future, he boasts. No gutter gin here, all licensed, taxed, and pure. He gestures proudly toward a line of copper stills, every drop measured by the gallon. Science and morality, hand in hand. And many manger cert not makes of the pastrons, when the same how to, came proud. You glance at the workers' faces pale, blank, exhausted. Their eyes flicker like the flames under the boilers. And what's their wage, you ask? The foreman shrugs. Enough to afford a drink after shift. Keeps 'em happy. You don't reply. You already know what kind of drink that will be. The streets glow golden as evening falls. But the gold is metaphorical, it's in the air, not the pockets. Vendors shout, musicians play, lovers stumble hand in hand through the fog. The gin shops overflow again. Every window reflects firelight and faces flushed with intoxication. It's almost beautiful, this illusion of prosperity. At one corner, a new establishment draws particular attention, the Juniper Exchange. Its signboard shows a cherub holding a still like a harp. Inside, gentlemen in powdered wigs sip gin from crystal goblets, while clerks record orders for wholesale barrels. You overhear phrases like export to Dublin and franchise rights. A man in satin leans toward you and says with a smile, "The future of England is clear as gin, my friend. Thanks for watching for more." You can't help thinking he might be right, and that's what terrifies you. As night thickens, the laughter turns louder. The streets near St. Giles resemble a carnival. Hawkers sell oysters, trinkets, and even small bottles of miracle gin, said to cure heartbreak and toothache alike. Somewhere nearby, a fiddler plays a waltz while a crowd dances until the cobblestones shake. For a fleeting moment, London feels alive, wild, reckless, invincible. Then, from across the street, a scream cuts through the noise. A barrel has burst in a distiller's cart, spilling gin across the ground. Before anyone can react, someone strikes a match. The spirit ignites in a flash, and blue fire dances up the wheels. The crowd scatters, shouting. The air fills with the scent of burning juniper and singed hair. When it's over, two men lie on the ground, one burned, one trampled. The fiddler keeps playing, perhaps too drunk to stop. You stand there watching, half horrified, half numb. The city doesn't pause for tragedy anymore. It metabolizes it. You wander home through lanes that smell of smoke and sugar, past signs that read "New Batch Tonight" and "Best Geneva in Town." You notice a new phenomenon. Advertisements painted directly on walls, offering family gin wholesome and honest. The audacity stuns you. Somewhere, a printer is making a fortune on false promises. You reach your lodging just as a group of men stumbles by, singing a bawdy song about a juniper bride. The refrain echoes off the brick walls. We wed her nightly, pay her in tears. She blesses our lips and steals our years. And the zacted money was so res repeated, to come fail ended down. Their laughter trails away, leaving the faint scent of gin behind. You realize that even the city's love songs have turned into advertisements. Lying awake, you listen to London breathe through the open window. The sounds blend: horses clattering, laughter rising, a baby crying somewhere below. It all feels strangely rhythmic, as if the entire city moves to one great, drunken heartbeat. You can almost hear the balance sheets behind it. Grain turned to profit. Despair turned to currency. The gin craze isn't just madness, it's momentum. The same restless energy that builds empires also destroys them. Historians still debate whether this frenzy was fueled by greed or by the raw machinery of modernity. Was it the first capitalist boom, or simply the oldest human story repeated hunger dressed in silk? Whatever it was, you feel it pressing in on all sides, irresistible and intoxicating. The fire, the laughter, the coins clinking in every pocket, it's all one symphony now. You close your eyes and imagine the city from above, smoke curling from stills like offerings, rivers glinting under the moon, every tavern a tiny furnace of light. London shines, dazzling and doomed. The gold rush is in full swing, and no one sees the cliff ahead. For now, though, the city doesn't care. The drinks are cheap, the profits plentiful, and the night young. You whisper to yourself, a toast to progress, though it tastes bitter on your tongue. Then you hear it again, the faint, ghostly refrain drifting through the alley. Madame Geneva, long may she reign. Bless us tonight and blind us again. And you know, deep down, that the crown she wears is made not of gold, but of glass. The next morning, London looks the same but sounds different. The street cries still rise, the carts still rattle, the air still reeks of coal smoke and juniper. Yet there's a new undercurrent, sharper and more self-righteous. Broadsides flap on every wall, printed in thick black ink, the devil in the dram. A warning to the gin-soaked masses, beware Madame Geneva, the whore of the nation. The same city that made her rich now pretends to hate her. You can't help but admire the hypocrisy. You stop at a lamppost where a crowd has gathered. A preacher in threadbare robes stands on a crate, waving a pamphlet as if it were a sword. Look upon this, he cries. William Hogarth's own engraving, Gin Lane. See the wages of sin drawn plain as day. And dissension and untoxicating, he holds it up. And even from where you stand, you can make out the chaos etched into its lines. Mothers drop infants. Beggars fight over bones. Drunks topple from stairs while buildings crumble in the background. In the center, a skeletal woman lifts a glass to her lips as her child falls to his death beside her. The preacher shakes with fervor. Here is our England, once a garden, now a graveyard. When disclaimer, a few people nod solemnly, but most only squint at the picture, mutter something, and wander off toward the nearest gin shop. Propaganda, it seems, competes poorly with thirst. Still, the image lodges in your mind. There's truth in its exaggeration. You've seen those streets. You've stepped over those bodies. Hogarth's engraving isn't a mirror, it's a magnifying glass, scorching the city with its focus. You buy a copy of Gin Lane from a street vendor and hold it under the pale light. The details are astonishing. The distiller's sign reading "drunk for a penny, dead drunk for 2 pence." The bones in the butcher's shop marked for sale. The church in the distance overshadowed by the pawnshop sign. You trace your finger along the lines and feel the pulse of outrage behind them. This isn't art for beauty, it's art for alarm. Hogarth, you recall, released it alongside another print, Beer Street. That one shows happy craftsmen, tidy homes, strong bodies, nourished by honest English ale. 2 streets, 2 moral choices. 1 nation divided by its drink. A mainstream fact. Hogarth's engravings were published in 1751. The same year Parliament passed the Gin Act that finally began to curb the craze. They were visual sermons, easy to understand, impossible to ignore. Even those who couldn't read could follow the story in the images. London didn't need literacy to feel shame. It needed pictures. You roll the print carefully and slip it under your arm. Around you, vendors hawk other pamphlets. The Drunkard's Dream, The Cry of the Poor, A Letter from the Devil to a Gin Drinker. Some are moral tracts, others bawdy satires mocking the very reformers they pretend to support. The city has found a way to profit from its own guilt. At the next corner, you stumble upon a man painting slogans onto walls with a brush dipped in tar. "Repent, you juniper swine," he writes in bold strokes. A group of apprentices jeers, tossing apple cores. One shouts, "Paint us a dram while you're at it." The man ignores them, mumbling to himself about judgment. You recognize the manic glint in his eyes, righteousness mixed with exhaustion. London breeds both in equal measure. He turns to you suddenly. "Do you drink, friend?" You hesitate. "Sometimes." "Then you're lost," he says simply, and returns to his work. You walk on, feeling strangely guilty for something you didn't even enjoy. At Covent Garden, a small stage has been erected. Actors in gaudy costumes perform The Tragedy of Gin, a new street play said to be inspired by Hogarth's print. The heroine, played by a man in a blonde wig, staggers across the stage, clutching an empty bottle and a doll meant to represent her child. "Oh, my poor babe," he wails theatrically. "Would that I had suckled thee with milk, not madness." The audience roars with laughter. Even morality becomes entertainment here. You watch a few minutes longer, then drift away as the baby is tossed into the crowd like a prop. Someone catches it, pockets it, and buys another drink. You notice more preachers now than ever, each shouting from a different street corner, each promising salvation through sobriety. They hold up Bibles and jars of water like rival brands. The competition for souls feels eerily like the competition for customers. One young preacher, barely out of boyhood, shouts so fiercely that veins stand out in his neck. "Turn from gin and return to grace. The wages of sin are death." A drunk interrupts him with a grin. "Death's cheaper than rent." The crowd roars approval. The preacher's voice cracks. He keeps shouting anyway. You feel a pang of pity for him. London doesn't want sermons, it wants anesthesia. Historians still debate how much of the moral panic was sincere and how much was staged. The upper classes, alarmed by riots and poverty, saw gin as a convenient scapegoat. Reformers printed pamphlets, warning that Britain would collapse into barbarism if the poor didn't sober up. Yet the same parliament that condemned gin continued taxing it for revenue. Morality and money marched hand in hand, arm in arm, straight into hypocrisy. You recall an anecdote. One bishop, famous for his crusades against drink, was found unconscious after a banquet, his chalice half full of gin punch. The scandal never reached print, of course. The printers were too busy publishing his next sermon. A quirky tidbit circulates among pamphleteers. They say one reformer claimed to see demons dancing in the vapors above every gin shop. He described them as small, laughing creatures, each with a juniper branch for a tail. You can't decide if he was mad or merely observant. London's demons don't need horns. They wear aprons and pour drinks. You pass a print shop where apprentices hang new posters in the window. One shows a skeletal figure labeled Madame Geneva, crowned with broken bottles, leading a parade of drunks into the Thames. Another depicts her chained at the feet of Britannia, who pours her gin into the river while angels applaud. The contrast is almost comical. You ask the shopkeeper which sells better. He grins. The first one. Folks like their devils lively. It figures. Misery sells, but redemption never moves much stock. Later, in a coffeehouse near Fleet Street, you overhear a group of gentlemen debating the gin question. Their wigs are powdered, their cups filled with steaming mocha rather than liquor. One declares, "Gin is the mother of all vice. It breeds idleness, theft, and moral decay." Another counters coolly, "Nonsense. The poor have always drunk something. Better gin than revolution." A third laughs, "I drink both, depending on the company." You sip your own coffee and stay silent. The hypocrisy in the air feels thicker than the smoke from the pipes. You realize that moral panic is simply another form of indulgence, virtue performed like theater, intoxicating in its own way. By dusk, the sermons grow louder. Bells ring across the city, as if to drown out the laughter from taverns. You wander towards Street Paul's, where a torchlit rally fills the square. Hundreds stand listening as a man on a wooden platform thunders against gin with the passion of a prophet. His words roll like thunder. London shall be reborn when its people cast down the bottle and lift up the Bible. The crowd cheers. You almost believe him. Almost. Then, as the speech ends, hawkers move through the crowd, selling commemorative gin mugs engraved with "God Save the King" down with Madame Geneva. You watch people buy them eagerly, filling them with the very drink they're supposed to renounce. The irony is so thick, it could be bottled. A small boy tugs at your sleeve, holding out a pamphlet. "The Tears of a Drunkard's Child," it reads. The front shows a child kneeling beside her mother's grave. You hand him a penny and ask if he's read it. He shakes his head. "Can't read, sir. But they say it's sad. There's no life from to another safe for mooning of cause." You watch him disappear into the crowd, his coins jingling. The paper crumples in your hand, ink smudging your fingers. You wonder how many tears have been sold in the name of reform. The truth is, panic has become profitable. Printers churn out moral tracts as fast as distillers produce gin. Artists, preachers, and politicians all compete for attention in the same marketplace of outrage. The city no longer distinguishes between righteousness and advertisement. And beneath the noise, the poor keep drinking. Because sermons don't feed children, and pamphlets don't warm hands. You pass a row of women gathered outside a gin shop, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. A reformer approaches, offering them leaflets about temperance. They take them politely, use them to light their pipes, and continue waiting for the door to open. That, you think, is London's true emblem, a flame fed by paper promises. As night deepens, you retreat to your room and unroll Gin Lane once more. The lines flicker in the candlelight, shadows deepening around the figures. You notice something you missed before: a small detail in the corner. A coffin maker carving a new lid while smiling. Business is good, the print suggests. Even death has adapted to the market. You set it aside and stare out the window. The city sprawls below, a constellation of fires and lamps and broken dreams. For every reformer shouting in the square, 10 more distillers light their stills. For every pamphlet condemning gin, a new tavern opens its doors. Historians will later call this the moral turning point of the century, a nation awakening to its conscience. But as you watch, it doesn't feel like awakening. It feels like theater, a pantomime of virtue performed to an audience already half asleep. You imagine Hogarth at his desk, engraving another line, pressing another plate, knowing his work will shock and sell in equal measure. Perhaps even he understands the irony that outrage and indulgence are twins, and the more one preaches, the more the other thrives. You wonder if anyone, even the artist himself, believes that pictures can cure addiction, or if they simply hope the noise will distract from the smell of gin long enough to sleep at night. Outside, church bells toll midnight. Somewhere in the distance, laughter rises from a tavern. The two sounds intertwine, sacred and profane, sermon and song. That's London's true harmony. Moral panic in one ear, temptation in the other. You blow out the candle, letting darkness swallow the room. The scent of ink lingers on your fingers. You think of the preacher's trembling voice, the pamphleteer's trembling hands, the reformer's trembling conscience. Everyone trembling, but no one still. The city moves on, preaching by day and drinking by night. In the end, you suspect, both sides worship the same God, one carved not of wood or stone, but of glass. You awaken to the sound of church bells and hoofbeats, echoing off the cobblestones, a rhythm that seems just a little too synchronized to be natural. Outside, the fog is streaked with a strange kind of order. Men in red coats marching in pairs, clerks carrying rolled parchments stamped with wax seals, and constables posting new notices on every wall. London, for once, is sober, at least officially. You step outside and join the small crowd forming around a notice nailed to a wooden beam. The parchment reads, in florid script, "An act for the better suppression of spirituous liquors and the preservation of public order." The date below it, 1736. The Gin Act. The government, finally cornered by its own conscience, or perhaps by angry clergy and ruined merchants, has decided to act. It declares that no person shall sell gin without a license costing £50 per year, a sum greater than the lifetime earnings of most of the city's poor. It also imposes heavy taxes on distillation, forbids unlicensed sale, and promises dire penalties for those who defy the law. You glance around. Some in the crowd cheer, others curse, but most simply stare in silence, unreadable, like gamblers calculating new odds. Later that day, you walk through Covent Garden again. The gin cellars have vanished, or rather, their doors have. Many are shuttered, painted over, or suddenly renamed as coffee houses. Yet the smell still seeps from under the cracks. London is not so easily tamed. Inside one such establishment, a newly christened Temperance Tea and Coffee Emporium, you see familiar faces. The same barkeep, the same customers, the same dull glaze in their eyes. The difference is cosmetic. The gin now flows from teapots instead of barrels. Cups of coffee steam faintly with juniper. A customer winks at you. "The law can't taste," he says. You laugh softly, though there's no joy in it. The government may think it has drawn a line in the sand, but the sand here is gin-soaked. A mainstream fact. The Gin Act of 1736 was intended to end the craze by pricing gin out of reach and punishing unlicensed sellers with £100 fines and imprisonment. Yet it backfired spectacularly. Only a handful of licenses were ever purchased. Instead, thousands of illegal sellers flourished under new disguises. London became a city of code words and hidden doors. A wooden spoon nailed above a lintel still meant gin. A teapot turned upside down in a window meant the same. Women carried bottles under their skirts, men sold drams from hollowed-out walking sticks, and children acted as lookouts for excise officers. What Parliament imagined as reform became, instead, rebellion. You follow a patrol of constables down an alley in Street Giles. They move with forced confidence, their boots crunching through debris. One kicks open a door to reveal a cellar where half a dozen people sit around a flickering candle, cups in hand. The air reeks of cheap alcohol. By order of the Crown, the sergeant barks. The drinkers scatter like rats. Two are caught, a man with a wooden leg and a woman clutching a baby. The sergeant grabs the bottle from her hand, sniffs it, grimaces. "Madam Geneva again," he mutters. Then, to the others, "Seize the still." You watch as the officers smash the copper pot with their truncheons. The woman wails, the man curses, the baby begins to cry. The sound echoes off the walls like a lamentation. When the constables leave, dragging the two prisoners behind them, the baby's cry continues. You can't tell whether it's from hunger or thirst. By evening, the city feels on edge. The gin shops have gone underground, but the resentment hasn't. Word spreads quickly of new arrests, new fines, new protests. You hear of mobs forming in Southwark and Holborn, jeering the tax collectors, pelting them with mud and stones. A constable is beaten unconscious near Fleet Market. Someone sets fire to an excise office. You stand at a corner near Drury Lane as shouts rise from the distance. The crowd surges like a living tide, faces flushed with anger and gin alike. They carry placards painted with crude slogans: "No gin, no peace, and down with tyranny." One man climbs a lamppost and waves a bottle above his head. "They can tax our souls next," he cries. The crowd roars approval. Historians will later call it the gin riots, though they flare and fade too quickly to become legend. For a few nights, however, the city burns with the fever of resistance. You can feel it in your bones, that fierce, half-drunken defiance that thrives best when cornered. A quirky story spreads among the rioters. A woman arrested for selling gin disguised her bottles as holy water from the River Jordan, complete with a priest's blessing. When officers tried to seize them, the crowd attacked, shouting that the king's men had blasphemed against God's miracle. The ruse worked, she escaped, and her sales doubled. It's absurd and brilliant. You can't decide whether to laugh or weep at the ingenuity of desperation. A few days later, Parliament sends in reinforcements. Soldiers patrol the streets in pairs. Preachers are stationed at markets to remind citizens of their duty. A public hanging is staged at Tyburn for two notorious gin sellers. The crowd, predictably, treats it as theater. Vendors hawk pies, pamphlets, and souvenir bottles of gin, sold as relics of martyrdom. You stand near the gallows and watch the condemned woman climb the steps. She's old, 50, perhaps, though poverty has aged her twice over. Her hands tremble, but her voice doesn't. "You'll hang us all soon enough," she shouts. "But you'll still drink." The crowd cheers. The rope tightens. History nods grimly. That evening, the taverns reopen quietly. The tea is stronger, the laughter a little louder. You sip your cup and glance at the others. No one talks about the hanging. It's already yesterday's entertainment. The barkeep hums as he wipes the counter, and the same circle of drinkers resumes the same old jokes. You realize the government's war on gin isn't about morality, it's about control. The poor were never meant to drink so freely, so cheaply, so rebelliously. Gin had become an equalizer of sorts, a mockery of hierarchy. In a world where birth and wealth dictated worth, gin let everyone forget their station for a few hours. That kind of freedom terrifies rulers more than any riot. Months pass. The crackdown intensifies. Informants multiply. Rewards are offered for tips about unlicensed distillers. London turns suspicious. Neighbors spy on each other. Friends whisper in code. The barkeep now serves you with a wary glance. One night, you follow the trail of rumor to a hidden still beneath a cobbler's shop. The door creaks open to reveal a cramped cellar lit by oil lamps. A half-dozen workers toil in silence. A woman stirs the mash. A boy pours liquor through a cloth to filter the impurities. The air is thick with fumes. The owner, a wiry man with clever eyes, greets you. Don't mind the smell, that's the scent of defiance. He pours you a dram. To the king's health, he adds with a smirk. You drink. It burns like revenge. Why keep at it, you ask. You know the penalties. Therefore missive mated not 41s, to leets and hast. He shrugs. Because people will always want it, and because they hate being told no. Every law they pass, we make twice the profit. The government should thank us, we're the best employment scheme in London. You realize he's right. Historians still argue whether the Gin Act failed because of poor enforcement or because it misunderstood human nature. One camp claims corruption ruined the effort. Constables bribed, judges lenient, juries sympathetic. Another argues the act struck too hard too fast, turning a public vice into private rebellion. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. By 1742, the government quietly abandoned enforcement. The law remained on paper, but died in practice. You can almost hear the city sigh in relief. One morning, you pass a man sitting on the steps of Streetbride's church, selling a new kind of pamphlet, less furious, more reflective. Its title catches your eye. The Law and the Bottle, a dialogue between them. You buy a copy and read. It's written as a conversation. Law scolds Bottle. Bottle mocks Law. Law grows weary and admits defeat. The final line makes you smile. You may chain a man's hand, but not his thirst. Some truths need no debate. A few years later, a new parliament tries again. The Gin Act of 1751 replaces punishment with persuasion. It lowers taxes slightly, licenses honest distillers, and bans small, unregulated shops. The shift is subtle but effective. The great fever of cheap gin begins to ebb. Prices rise, quality improves, and the poorest turn back to beer or tea. But you know better than to call it victory. The addiction doesn't vanish, it evolves. You walk through Soho one evening and see the difference already. The gin shops look cleaner, their windows polished, their patrons quieter. Behind the counters, respectable merchants pour cordials instead of drams. The same spirit, new vocabulary. The law has finally learned the language of compromise. In the fading light, you pass a reformer reading Hogarth's Beer Street aloud to a small audience. Industry and virtue, he cries. The backbone of our nation restored. His voice trembles with triumph. Yet behind him, in the shadow of a nearby doorway, a figure raises a cup of gin and whispers, "We're still here." You smile. Of course they are. Later that night, as you stand on London Bridge, the Thames glimmers below like a dark mirror. You think about the arc of this story, the government's panic, the people's resistance, the endless push and pull between morality and appetite. It's not really about gin, you realize. It never was. It's about the attempt to legislate human desire, to draw neat boundaries around chaos. The law can fine, imprison, hang, but it cannot erase the ache that drives a person to lift a glass in the first place. The moon reflects off the water, rippling like liquid metal. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone will look back on this moment and see not sin or virtue, but inevitability. You close your eyes and listen. The river murmurs softly, like a drunk forgiving himself. The law struck hard, but the city simply bent and flowed around it, flexible, fluid, impossible to contain. And somewhere, beneath the respectable calm, the faint echo of laughter rises from an unseen gin shop. You step out into a city that no longer sleeps, only dozes with one eye open. The gin acts have dulled nothing. They've simply driven the noise underground. London hums with the low vibration of secrets, the kind that happen behind shuttered windows and in alleys that smell of copper and smoke. The lamps along Holborn gutter in the wind, and somewhere in the dark, a bell clangs 3 times. That sound means another hour survived. It's here, under this cold glow, that the night watchmen earn their pay. You spot one now, an old man wrapped in a heavy coat, a staff in his hand, and a lantern swinging from his belt. His breath puffs white in the air as he trudges through puddles. The metal tag on his chest reads simply "Watch." He pauses at the corner, peers into the shadows, and sighs. You follow him at a distance. Another fine night for sinners, he mutters, not to you but to the fog. His voice is gravel ground against weariness. Every few steps he stops, raps his staff against the cobblestones, and calls out, past 3 o'clock, and a cloudy morning. The announcement is ritual, half habit, half prayer. Somewhere, a window creaks open. A drunk woman shouts, "Go home, Grandpa," and tosses a bottle that shatters beside him. He doesn't flinch. He's seen worse. He keeps walking. You follow. The city looks different through his eyes. The grandeur fades. The filth shines. You pass the shell of a burned gin shop, just charred beams, and a sign still legible in the lamplight, "Drunk for a penny." A cat picks through the ashes. A few paces on, you find a man collapsed in a doorway, snoring so loudly it almost sounds alive. The watchman prods him gently with his staff. "Up you get, sir," he says softly. No answer. "Suit yourself." He drapes a rag over the man's chest and moves on. You glance back. The rag is someone's torn apron. "This is every night now," the watchman says without looking at you. "Used to be brawlers and thieves. Now it's just the quiet ones. They drink themselves still. Quieter work for me, I suppose." You ask how long he's done this job. "Since the last plague year," he replies. "Different sickness, same stench." He chuckles, but it sounds hollow. A mainstream fact. The night watchmen of 18th century London were poorly paid and poorly equipped. Many were old, some half-blind, others half-drunk themselves. They carried little more than a staff, a whistle, and the authority of exhaustion. Tasked with keeping order in the world's largest, loudest city, they were expected to quell riots, stop robberies, and escort the lost home, all for a few shillings a week. You walk beside him as he turns down Drury Lane. "They say gin killed more men than the French," he mutters. "Maybe, but it keeps me employed." You smile despite yourself. He notices and adds, "Don't mistake humor for hope, lad. It's just the only thing that don't cost a license." The streets narrow, pressing closer as if listening. The lamps grow sparse. Somewhere ahead, laughter bursts, sharp and sudden, followed by the thud of fists. The watchman's shoulders tense. "There," he says. "Always the same corner." You hurry after him. 2 men are fighting outside a tavern's back door. One swings wildly. The other ducks and lands a punch that sends the first sprawling into the gutter. The winner sways on his feet, panting, and raises his bottle in triumph. "To liberty," he shouts, before collapsing beside his opponent. The watchman sighs. "Liberty's cheap these days." He kneels, checks their pulses, and shakes his head. Still breathing, that's enough. He drags them both out of the way of the road, props them against a wall, and scribbles a note on a scrap of parchment. 2 drunks, alive at dawn. You ask if anyone ever thanks him. He laughs quietly. "Once, a dog did. Then he bit me." You walk on. The rhythm of his steps becomes almost hypnotic. Thump, splash, thump, splash. He hums under his breath a sailor's tune, maybe, from long ago. "Used to be I was on the river," he says. "Carried goods from Wapping to Westminster. But the drink took that job too. Couldn't keep my balance on deck no more. So now I keep watch while the rest fall over." He gestures toward the shuttered buildings. "They drink to forget, I watch to remember. Fair trade." A rat darts across your path. The watchman stops, raises his lantern, and peers down an alley. "See that?" he whispers. "That's where the thieves run their gin now. No more signboards, just whispers. You could walk past 10 stills and never know." You follow his gaze. In the gloom, faint light flickers through a crack in the wall. You creep closer and glimpse movement shadows bending over a copper pot, steam rising. The smell of alcohol drifts out, mixed with the scent of burned sugar. The watchman shakes his head. "If I had a crown for every still I've seen, I'd buy Parliament and make it honest." You both move on. A quirky tidbit you hear from him later. "They say one fellow tried to bribe a watchman with gin once. Fool didn't know the watchman already had a bottle in his coat. Took the bribe anyway, drank both, and forgot who he was supposed to arrest." He chuckles, then sighs. "Maybe that was me. Hard to say." The confession hangs in the cold air. You reach the edge of Street Giles, the heart of the city's misery. The streets here pulse with human noise even at this hour. Babies crying, dogs barking, men singing off-key. The watchman lifts his lantern higher, its glow barely cutting through the murk. He points to a doorway where a woman huddles with 2 children. "Every week I see her there," he murmurs. "Says she's waiting for her husband. Been dead 2 years, that one, but she waits." He moves closer, sets a small crust of bread on the step, and walks away without a word. You ask why he bothers? He answers, "Because the city don't." One half, near 7 Dials, he stops to confer with another watchman, a younger man, face pale and eyes sunken. 2 dead in the alley by Neal Street, the younger one reports. One's a lad, maybe 15, other looks foreign. "Gin? Half a bottle between 'em." "Right, tell the beadle in the morning. I'll see to it." "Ah." The younger man nods and shuffles off. The old one watches him go. "Won't last long," he mutters. "None of us do. You can't keep staring at this city's face and not start seeing ghosts." He looks at you then, and for the first time you realize how tired he truly is. The wrinkles around his eyes are deep as the cracks in the pavement. "You write, don't you?" he asks suddenly. You blink. A little. Then remember this part. They'll talk about the gin, the riots, the laws, but they'll forget the men who cleaned up after it. We're the city's broom. No one keeps the broom. You promise you'll remember? He nods once. Good. Then it weren't all wasted. The bells of Street Martins strike 4. The watchman stops, rubs his knees, and sighs. Morning soon. The drunks will be waking for another round. Why did not Node Frains? A flackety. As if on cue, you pass a doorway where someone snores loudly. The old man smiles faintly. Told you. He turns toward the river, leading you down to the embankment, where dawn leaks slowly into the fog. The water glows faintly orange. Barges move like shadows. He sits on a crate, sets his lantern beside him, and stretches his legs. Best part of the job, he says, when the city pretends it's clean again. You sit beside him. For a moment, neither of you speaks. Historians still argue whether London's night watch system actually worked. Some claim it kept basic order. Others insist it was symbolic, a ritual of reassurance in a world too chaotic to control. What's certain is that the watchmen saw more of the city's truth than any magistrate or minister. They were its reluctant witnesses, recording its sins in silence. You look out across the Thames and imagine all the crimes, confessions, and quiet acts of kindness that vanish with the daylight. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows. The watchman stands. That's my cue. He picks up his lantern and nods toward the horizon, where the faintest blue seeps through the gray. When the light comes, they'll forget we were here. That's fine. I'll still be walking tonight. He starts back up the hill, calling out as he goes. Past 5 o'clock, and a fair morning coming. Be an Arsène, of Mitre. His voice fades into the hum of awakening city. You linger by the river a while longer. The tide laps gently against the stone steps. Across the water, you see a church spire catching the first rays of sun, glinting faintly like a promise London has no intention of keeping. A cart rattles by carrying barrels gin again, probably. The world resets. You think of the watchmen, of all the invisible souls who keep the city from collapsing entirely, the sweepers, the beadles, the whores who nurse dying drunks, the children who light lamps. History rarely writes their names, yet their footprints fill every street. The fog begins to thin. You can almost smell the bakeries starting up for the morning, the mingled scents of bread and soot and juniper. Life goes on. It always does. As you turn to leave, you glance once more at the river. The surface ripples like glass touched by wind. You imagine the watchman's reflection there, dim, wavering, eternal. In a city drunk on forgetfulness, he alone remembers. You walk back through the waking streets. Merchants set up stalls. Carts creak. Milkmaids call. The same buildings that looked haunted a few hours ago now seem harmless. Sunlight makes even squalor look honest. You realize that daylight is London's disguise. The filth doesn't disappear, it simply changes costume. By noon, the city will be noisy again, preaching virtue, selling sin, pretending balance. But somewhere, under the same sky, the night watchman will be sleeping, dreaming of silence he'll never hear. And tonight, he'll rise again, lantern swinging, muttering to the darkness, past midnight, and all not well. But if hell for yourself. The city wakes beneath a thin sun, and for once the air feels almost gentle. You walk through Smithfield Market, where the butchers shout cheerfully over the bleating of animals and the clatter of knives. The streets are slick with blood and sawdust, but there's laughter here, a strange, reckless joy that belongs to people who live one day at a time. You pause at a stall selling trinkets, tin charms, shaped like bottles, each labeled a cure for what ails ye. The vendor grins. Gin inside if you shake it. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. For years, the line between medicine and poison has been so blurred that no one remembers where it began. The apothecaries sell bottles of aqua mirabilis and cordial waters, pretty names for spirits scented with herbs. Doctors prescribe gin for nearly everything: gout, fever, melancholy, childbirth, toothache, even heartbreak. You can't help but think of it as the 18th century cure-all, a potion for every ache except the one that matters: loneliness. You duck into one of those apothecary shops, its shelves glittering with bottles in every shade of green and amber. A sign above the counter reads, "Health in every drop." The shopkeeper, a balding man in a powdered wig, welcomes you with professional gravity. "And what affliction troubles you, sir?" You hesitate. "Curiosity." He smiles thinly. "That I cannot cure, but I can dull it." He reaches for a bottle labeled Holland's water, infused with juniper, anise, and a touch of wormwood. Excellent for the digestion. And the disposition. His Aceber knew then, our los leda. You sip the offered sample. It burns less than the street gin, but the warmth that follows is the same, a wave of false peace that makes your body believe, for a few moments, that all is well. A mainstream fact. In Georgian England, gin was not just tolerated by medicine, it was prescribed. Apothecaries, barbers, and even surgeons used it as a base for tinctures. It sterilized wounds, disguised the bitterness of herbs, and soothed the nerves of patients too poor for laudanum. For childbirth, midwives mixed it with honey and parsley, calling it mother's comfort. For infants, a few drops of gin and milk were said to steady the humors. It's no wonder, then, that the same bottle sat on both the sickbed and the tavern shelf. You ask the apothecary whether he believes in his own remedies. He chuckles. "Believe? No, sir. But I sell to those who do. And faith is the strongest medicine known to man." You leave the shop lighter in purse and heavier in irony. Across the street, a doctor's carriage pulls up before a narrow townhouse. The brass plate on the door reads Dr. Horatio Bell, physician and surgeon. You follow the doctor inside out of curiosity or maybe out of habit. The waiting room smells faintly of lavender and despair. A maid ushers you toward a chair beside an elderly woman wrapped in shawls. She clutches a handkerchief to her mouth and coughs violently. The doctor emerges moments later, immaculate in his waistcoat and wig. He glances at her, nods sagely, and prescribes a tonic to warm the blood and cheer the spirits. You already know what it will contain. When it's your turn, you ask if gin truly has medicinal value. Dr. Bell smiles, the way men smile when they're tired of being questioned. "My dear sir," he says, "if it doesn't cure, it certainly doesn't complain. And in my profession, that's almost the same thing." Well, of Repersode, you leave the surgery and head toward the Foundling Hospital, where children abandoned by gin-sick mothers are given a second chance, or at least a quieter death. The gates creak open to reveal rows of small beds, each with a thin blanket and a number carved into the headboard. The air smells of starch and disinfectant. A nurse walks between the cots, singing softly to the babies. Her song is sweet but trembles at the edges, as if she's afraid it might break. She stops beside you. "Visitors aren't common," she says. "I'm not a visitor," you reply. "Just observing. I want the wind off into now. Then, observe this." She gestures toward a sleeping infant. "He came to us with gin in his veins. Fed it since birth, to keep him quiet. Now he sleeps always." You tell me what kind of medicine does that. You can't answer. Outside, the church bells toll noon. The sound rolls over the rooftops like a sermon no one's listening to. You make your way toward the market square, where a crowd has gathered around a man shouting about miracles. He wears a crimson coat and waves a small vial in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," he cries, "behold, doctor, Fiddler's universal elixir. Restores vigor, purifies the blood, and drives away melancholy." The crowd murmurs. Someone asks the price. "Only 6 pence a bottle. And for the modest sum of 1 shilling, I'll throw in a second for your mother, your mistress, or your misfortune." Like frowned. You know what's in the bottle. So does he. The liquid glows faintly golden in the sun, a mix of gin, honey, and crushed herbs. He sells 30 in half an hour. You can't decide if he's a charlatan or a genius. A boy beside you whispers, "That's not real medicine." You glance down. "How do you know?" He shrugs. "Real medicine don't make you laugh. You almost laugh yourself." Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Historians still debate how much of the medical endorsement of gin was ignorance and how much was convenience. Some argue that doctors genuinely believed in its virtues. Others claim it was simply the cheapest anesthetic available. Both might be true. In a century before antibiotics, anything that dulled pain felt divine. Gin was not salvation, but it was forgetfulness in a bottle. And sometimes, that was enough. A quirky tidbit surfaces in medical diaries of the time. One physician noted that patients cured by gin seldom relapse, for they are too dead to ail again. He wrote it without irony. You wonder whether the ink trembled in his hand. By evening, the sky turns bruised purple. You wander into a tavern called the Apothecary's Rest. Its sign shows a skull holding a goblet, perhaps unintentionally honest. Inside, the air hums with chatter. You sit beside a man who wears a surgeon's coat stained with dried blood. He's drinking gin neat, no tonic, no herbs. He catches your eye. "Cheers, friend. To medicine." You raise your glass cautiously. "Do you use it in your work?" He laughs. "I am my work. After I amputate a limb, I drink to forget. After they die, I drink again to remember." He gestures to the bottle. "It's cheaper than prayer." You ask if he's ever tried stopping. He smiles faintly. "I have, once. Wrote about it in my ledger. Left a blank page where my courage should have been. Note: the recent artifice." He drains the glass, stands, and leaves without paying. Later, you find yourself near the edge of the city, where the apothecaries fade and the quacks take over. Here, medicine is street theater. You watch a man with wild hair sell anti-gin tonics to a crowd of women, swearing it will purge the demon from your liver. It smells of vinegar and garlic. He earns a fortune in pennies. Another hawker claims his potion will protect against temptation. You read the ingredients: juniper, citrus peel, and sugar gin again, only rebranded as virtue. London, it seems, has discovered how to moralize intoxication. A few streets away, you pass a small chapel lit by candles. Inside, the pews are filled not with worshippers but with the sick. A young curate tends to them, offering water and prayer in equal measure. You sit in the back and listen. His voice is soft, steady. "God sends both poison and remedy," he says. But he does not always label them. After the service, you approach him. "Do you think gin is evil?" He considers. "Evil? No, merely impatient. It offers what life withholds." He smiles sadly. "Most of my parishioners find it faster than grace." You leave before you can decide whether he's cynical or kind. By nightfall, the taverns fill again. You step into one near Fleet Ditch. The clientele is a mix of sailors, apprentices, and half-sober doctors. The room buzzes with half-serious debates about medicine. "Gin cures colic," one insists. "Gin causes colic," another retorts. A third slams his mug down. "Gentlemen, gin is colic." Laughter erupts. Someone raises a toast. To health, in whatever form it comes. You drink, because refusing would feel like treason against the century. As the night deepens, the conversation shifts. A man with a philosopher's air begins to speak. "They say gin has killed more than war," he says, "but perhaps it saves more than we know. How many men would have slit their wrists if not for the comfort of forgetfulness? How many women would have drowned their children if not for one more drink to numb the thought?" The room falls silent. For once, no one argues. He lifts his glass. "Medicine or menace, it depends on how much you need to be cured." He drinks, and the silence holds like a breath. Outside, the air is cool, almost kind. You walk past shuttered shops, their signs glinting faintly under the moon. Apothecary, surgeon, distiller, the same trade, different labels. You think about how history will remember them, if it remembers them at all. The doctors and distillers both believed they were healing the nation, each in their own way. Perhaps they were. Healing doesn't always mean saving. Sometimes, it just means soothing until the end arrives. You stop beside a window and catch your reflection in the glass. For a moment, it looks like someone else, someone older, wearier, maybe wiser. Behind the reflection, rows of bottles gleam like tiny altars. You could almost pray to them. You whisper, "A cure for what ails ye," and almost believe it. Then you turn away, leaving your reflection behind, and walk into the dark. You awaken to laughter echoing from behind a set of tall, white Georgian columns, the kind that smell faintly of candle wax and entitlement. London's rich have always known how to turn scandal into trend, and this season, even ruin wears perfume. You follow the sound through a side gate and into a courtyard where carriages crowd like gilded beetles. Footmen in powdered wigs usher guests into a townhouse blazing with light. The invitation on the door reads, "An evening of cordials and conversation." You know what that means. Gin has gone respectable. Inside, the air is heavy with roses, tobacco, and expectation. A harpsichord twinkles in the corner, while servants glide silently between guests, carrying crystal decanters. The men sparkle with polished buckles. The women shimmer in silks, the color of ripe fruit. Their laughter rises in waves, refined but reckless. You realize that the same liquor that drowned the poor is now poured into cut glass and renamed elegance. "Would you care for a juniper cordial, sir?" asks a servant, offering a glass. You take it. The drink smells faintly of citrus and virtue. "It's gin," you whisper. He smiles. "Not at this address." A mainstream fact. By the 1750s, after decades of riots, reform, and lawmaking, gin began to slip quietly into high society. Distillers rebranded their product as cordials or flavored waters. The wealthy adopted it not for oblivion but for novelty, adding orange peel, cinnamon, and exotic botanicals from the colonies. The same parliament that once damned gin now drank it beneath chandeliers. The difference was packaging and price. You watch as a gentleman in a powdered wig raises his glass. "To England," he declares, "where even our sins are fashionable." The crowd applauds. You can't tell if they're joking. Nearby, a lady in a silver gown fans herself and murmurs to a friend, "I find gin so very democratic. Everyone can be ruined by it, don't you think?" Her companion laughs. "Indeed, my dear, it's the only equality I approve of. That is from never way and a people." A servant refills your glass, and you drift toward a group of philosophers arguing near the fireplace. One quotes Locke, another counters with Rousseau, and a third sighs dramatically. "Gentlemen," he says, "reason is overrated. Give me a good cordial, and I shall discover the nature of truth without leaving my chair." They toast him, and one adds, "You'll discover the floor first." You smile into your drink. These are the same men who write essays about virtue and progress. Yet here they are discussing morality with gin-stained lips. You think of Hogarth's Prince, of Gin Lane and Beer Street, and wonder if the artist could ever have imagined this. Ruin repackaged as refinement. You wander into a smaller room where the air feels cooler. A young woman sits at a harpsichord, her fingers fluttering over the keys like moths. She hums as she plays, eyes half closed. Beside her, a decanter glows amber in the candlelight. "That's Handel," she says without looking up. "He composed it after supper one evening. They say he drank Holland's gin before he wrote anything worth hearing." "Is that true?" you ask. She shrugs. "Everything beautiful begins in sin. You should know that by now." Her words hang between you like perfume. Outside, the night glimmers with frost. A carriage waits by the curb, horses stamping, breath steaming. Two gentlemen emerge from the house still laughing, arms around each other's shoulders. Their wigs tilt precariously as they stumble toward the carriage. One calls out, "Drive us to Ranelagh. I hear the fountains are flowing with punch tonight." You follow at a distance, curious. Ranelagh Gardens lies west, a world away from Gin Lane, an open-air pleasure ground where London's elite parade themselves like exotic birds. Tonight, it hums with music and light. Lanterns hang from the trees like captured stars. Couples stroll arm in arm, their laughter weaving through the sound of violins. You see fountains indeed, though they flow not with water but with pink gin punch, ladled out by servants in livery. The guests sip delicately, pretending not to notice when their hands tremble. Somewhere, someone begins to sing an Italian aria about love's sweet poison. Historians still debate whether the upper classes truly embraced gin or merely flirted with it. Some accounts claim it remained a novelty and after-dinner curiosity soon replaced by claret. Others argue it became the foundation for cordial society, the polite intoxication that defined Georgian evenings. The truth, as usual, lies in the middle. They condemned the poor for addiction, while crafting their own version of it in silk and lace. A quirky tidbit from a diarist of the time recounts how a duchess once hosted a cordial ball, at which guests were judged not by their dancing but by the elegance of their intoxication. The prize went to a young noblewoman, who fainted so gracefully that two poets swore they'd seen an angel fall. You imagine the scene: powdered faces, glittering jewels, and the faint sweet scent of juniper masking decay. At Ranelagh, you sit beside the ornamental lake, watching reflections ripple like dreams. Across the water, a group of men sing drunkenly, their voices overlapping in tuneless harmony. One falls into the lake to thunderous applause. No one helps him out. A man beside you chuckles. He's dressed like a gentleman, but his accent betrays the docks. Used to haul barrels for these swells, he says. Now I sell to 'em. Same gin, fancier bottles. Do they know? You ask. No? He laughs. They prefer it. Makes 'em feel dangerous, like they're slumming without the smell. He lifts his cup. To commerce, the true cordial of England. You toast him, though your stomach turns. As the night deepens, the music swells. Dancers whirl beneath the lanterns, their faces flushed, their movements fluid and feverish. A gentleman stumbles, laughs, and nearly takes a lady's wig with him as he falls. She gasps, then bursts into laughter herself. The crowd applauds as if it were part of the show. You realize something. The upper class has mastered what the poor never could: the art of controlled collapse. They drink to the edge of disgrace but never past it. Or perhaps they simply have servants to clean up what history prefers to forget. At midnight, a toast begins. Hundreds of glasses rise toward the stars. To reason, someone shouts. To liberty, cries another. To whatever keeps the room spinning, adds a third, earning the loudest cheer of all. The crowd drinks, and the air fills with sighs of satisfaction. You watch their faces, serene, glowing, almost innocent. For a moment, you envy them. They've turned vice into ceremony, oblivion into art. You remember what the young woman said earlier. Everything beautiful begins in sin. Perhaps she was right, but beauty, you think, is a poor shield against consequence. When the carriages finally roll away, dawn finds the gardens littered with silk fans, empty bottles, and wilted flowers. A gardener sweeps quietly, humming under his breath. They'll come again tonight, he says when he sees you watching. Different gowns, same faces. He gestures toward the discarded glasses. That's what's left of their virtue. You ask if he ever drinks. Only water, he replies. I can't afford illusions. By afternoon, the newspapers arrive. The gossip columns describe last night's festivities in glowing detail, the elegance of the company, the refinement of their gaiety, the divine cordial of juniper that quickened both wit and conversation. Not a word about the man in the lake, nor the servant who slipped on the marble stairs and broke his leg. You set the paper down and laugh softly. The city has found its new mask, painted in powder and politeness. That evening, you return to the poorer quarters out of habit or perhaps guilt. The streets are quieter now. The great fever of gin has cooled, but the hangover lingers. You pass a woman scrubbing steps, humming the same aria you heard at Ranelagh. Her voice is cracked but hauntingly sweet. Where did you learn that? You ask. From the garden walls, she says. I was a maid there once. They sang while we worked. Do you still drink? She smiles faintly. Sometimes, only when I miss the music. Her answer feels like a confession the city itself might give. Historians will later romanticize this period as the birth of polite society, when manners and moderation triumphed over excess. But walking through these streets, you see something else entirely. Transformation, not redemption. Gin didn't die, it evolved, refined, perfumed, and re-entered the bloodstream of the nation disguised as grace. You picture London as one vast organism. The poor, its stomach, the rich, its head, both intoxicated in different ways. The body survives because it never stops feeding itself lies. As the sun sinks behind the rooftops, you find yourself near St. James's Park. The fashionable strollers glide past, their shadows long and graceful. From somewhere, The scent of juniper drifts faintly on the wind. It's subtle, almost holy. You can't tell whether it comes from a gentleman's flask or a beggar's cup. Maybe both. You realize that gin has become England's mirror. Whoever looks into it sees what they wish to see: medicine, menace, elegance, escape. The reflection shifts, but the liquid remains the same. You take one last breath of that fragrant air and whisper to the empty street, "Madame Geneva, you've learned your manners well." Then the church bells begin to ring for evening prayers, and the city, ever adaptable, answers with the clink of glasses. The sound of marching feet pulls you from your half-sleep. Outside your window, London's narrow streets echo with the tramp of boots, the clink of bayonets, and the murmured cadence of command. Red coats gleam in the dawn light, like streaks of blood painted onto fog. You lean out to watch them pass rows upon rows of young men barely out of boyhood, their faces pale, their eyes wary. Somewhere among the ranks, someone hums a tune that wavers between a hymn and a tavern song. You follow the sound to the barracks near Hyde Park, where the soldiers drill in tight formations. The air smells of sweat, gunpowder, and something sharper, the unmistakable tang of gin. A sergeant's voice cuts through the morning. "Steady, keep those muskets level." But his men's movements are sluggish, out of sync. Their discipline has been drowned in juniper. When the sergeant's back turns, one soldier nudges another and whispers, "A drop of Geneva before breakfast never hurt a man." The other laughs. "Aye, unless the breakfast gunfire." Ollie Frage, you realize, as you watch, that gin has found yet another army to conquer. A mainstream fact. By the mid-18th century, gin had become entwined with British military life. Soldiers drank it to steady nerves, to numb pain, to disinfect wounds, and perhaps most dangerously to fill the endless boredom between battles. In foreign postings, it was mixed with bitter quinine tonic to mask the taste, a practice that would one day give birth to the gin and tonic. Officially, it was rationed. Unofficially, it was everywhere. You walk through the barracks yard, where a makeshift canteen operates out of a tent. The sergeant, a man whose voice could strip bark off a tree, counts coins, while a private ladles gin into tin cups. "Half ration," the sergeant grumbles. "Half, and that's generous." The private grins. "Aye, and half is still enough to make a man forget orders." They both laugh. War, you realize, breeds irony as easily as death. You follow the scent of mash to the back of the yard, where a group of soldiers crouch around a small copper still. They're distilling their own contraband liquor, using grain meant for bread. One feeds the fire while another watches the thin stream drip into a bucket. "We call her the Duchess," one says proudly, patting the side of the still. "She keeps us warm and makes us brave." "Or stupid," says another, earning laughter. "Same thing in uniform," comes the reply. They pass you a cup. The gin inside is raw, almost metallic. It burns down your throat like liquid courage, and leaves the same aftertaste as regret. Later that day, you follow the regiment on patrol through the streets. They're meant to keep order, but the city mocks them. Children jeer, calling them juniper soldiers and Madame Geneva's guards. The soldiers ignore it, though one mutters, "Better drunk than dead." They pause at a tavern door. The sergeant hesitates, then waves them inside. "One round," he says, "for morale." Inside, the tavern hums with warmth and noise. Civilians and soldiers mingle, their laughter blurring into the same pitch. A fiddler plays a reel in the corner while mugs clatter against tables. You notice how quickly the men forget rank once the gin begins to flow. Officers laugh with privates, enemies of an hour ago arm in arm, singing bawdy verses about victory and women who never existed. One soldier climbs onto the table, toasting, "His Majesty, the Juniper King." The crowd roars approval. You can almost imagine Madame Geneva herself smiling somewhere, counting her loyal subjects. Historians still argue whether the British Army's fondness for gin made it stronger or weaker. Some claim it boosted morale, gave soldiers the courage to march and fight despite exhaustion. Others insist it sapped discipline and turned barracks into chaos. The truth, as always, depends on who's holding the bottle. A quirky record survives from 1743. During a parade review, one general found half his regiment too drunk to stand. He ordered them flogged the next morning, only to be found asleep in his chair, a bottle of Holland's gin empty beside him. The report notes dryly, "The matter was not pursued further." That night, You're invited to the officers' mess. It's a grander affair, all silver cups and polished boots. But the ritual is the same. Gin flows freely, disguised as punch or restorative. The colonel, a broad man with a booming laugh, raises his glass. To England's strength, the captain beside him mutters, and her weakness. 1. Telge, the colonel grins. Aye, but we wear both well. The men drink, sing, and argue about politics until the candles burn low. You listen, half amused, half appalled. These are men who lead armies. Yet their world seems no larger than the rim of their glasses. At some point, a young lieutenant slams his cup down. Do you know why we drink? He demands, his voice unsteady. Because this country loves victory, but forgets the victors. Gin remembers us, at least. No one answers. The colonel refills his cup. Then let's not disappoint her. And a looking prokes. Outside, the cold bites at your face. You walk through the quiet streets, the sound of distant singing still drifting from the barracks. Somewhere, a church bell tolls midnight. You pass a soldier sitting on the steps of a warehouse, his head in his hands. Rough night? You ask. He looks up. His eyes are red-rimmed but lucid. Rough life, he says. They tell us gin's a reward, but it's the only thing that makes punishment bearable. He takes a sip from a flask and offers it to you. For the nerves, he says with a tired grin. You hesitate, then take it. The liquid warms you instantly and chills you a heartbeat later. The next morning, London wakes to rain and news of another riot. The soldiers are called to restore order in Southwark, where gin sellers have refused to close their shops. You go with them, wading through mud and fury. The crowd hurls stones and curses. The soldiers raise muskets. Somewhere amid the chaos, a bottle shatters, and the scent of gin cuts through the air like perfume. The sergeant shouts, "Hold the line," but one private breaks rank, lunging forward to strike a rioter. A shot rings out. Then another. The air fills with smoke and screams. When it clears, the street is littered with bodies, 3 civilians, 1 soldier. The soldier's hand still clutches his flask. You turn away, stomach twisting. The sergeant kneels beside the corpse and pries it loose. For evidence, he mutters, slipping it into his coat. Later, you'll see him drink from it behind the barracks. In the weeks that follow, rumors spread of soldiers deserting, of officers trading stolen gin for favors. The army issues new regulations limiting drink, but the ink dries faster than obedience. In the taverns, toasts to the king's health are replaced by toasts to the queen of juniper. Even the chaplain admits privately that a dram before dawn keeps the devil patient. As a saying did not the 4,000, the newspapers mock it, printing cartoons of soldiers kneeling before barrels instead of cannons. One caption reads, "England's true arsenal." The public laughs, but the laughter tastes bitter. They know the soldiers are only doing openly what everyone else does quietly. One evening, the regiment gathers for a farewell parade. They're shipping out to the colonies, India, some say, others, Africa. The chaplain blesses them, the band plays, and the colonel addresses his men. You are the pride of England, he declares. Carry her honor with you. What, Deezer? A private whispers to his neighbor. And her hangover. The colonel continues, undeterred. Remember your duty, your discipline, your devotion. He pauses, then adds with a wink, and drink only what's issued. Laughter ripples through the ranks. The wagons creak forward, barrels stacked behind the supply carts. You realize that gin will march with them, just as it has marched through every British campaign, silent, loyal, and unstoppable. Historians still debate whether gin followed empire or led it. Some suggest it was the true colonial ambassador, softening native resistance with intoxication. Others argue it was simply the soldier's shield against disease and despair. The truth is simpler. Gin went wherever the British flag went, poured from the same barrels that carried powder and pride. A quirky anecdote survives from one expedition. When supplies ran low, a captain ordered the men to dilute their gin with river water. Within a week, half were dead of fever. The gin was safer, his journal notes grimly. You wonder how many empires have been built not on courage, but on coping mechanisms. As night falls again, you return to the now empty barracks. The scent of smoke and juniper lingers, faint but persistent. On a table lies a forgotten flask, its silver dented, its initials worn away. You lift it, feel its weight. Inside, a few drops remain. You pour them into your palm and watch the light catch them clear, pure, deceptively innocent. You let them fall to the ground. The stone drinks faster than any man. Outside, the wind rises, carrying faint echoes of a marching song. We fight for king and comfort. We march for queen and gin. And if the devil takes us, he'll find we're drunk again. The tune fades into the distance, swallowed by the rain. You stand there a while longer, listening to nothing, before turning back toward the city. The soldiers will leave, the stills will remain, and the river will keep running its waters, as clear and as deceptive as the spirit that built an empire and broke its men. You wake to the sound of shouting. It rolls through the narrow lanes like thunder trapped in a maze, echoing, colliding, growing louder by the second. You push open your window, and there it is, London, trembling. Smoke rises from somewhere near Holborn. Church bells clang without rhythm, and from every alley, people pour out, men, women, children, faces flushed, fists raised, mouths open in one collective roar that doesn't sound like protest or prayer, but something between. At first you think it's another execution day, or a fire. But the noise is too wide, too raw. Then you hear the word that burns through the air, gin. The gin riots have begun. The street below is chaos in motion. A crowd surges toward a cart carrying barrels seized by the constables. A woman screams, "They're stealing our comfort." A boy jumps onto the cart, smashes a tap with a hammer, and gin pours out like salvation. People fall to their knees beneath it, cupping their hands, laughing, crying, drinking. You can smell it even from above, sharp, sweet, furious. You throw on your coat and rush outside, swept into the tide. The crowd moves as one living thing, flowing down Fleet Street toward the river. Windows rattle. A preacher tries to shout them down from a pulpit, but someone throws a bottle that shatters beside his head. "The Lord can have his wine," a man bellows. "We'll keep our gin." By the sapes the face, the roar that follows could wake the dead. A mainstream fact, between 1736 and 1751, London experienced repeated waves of unrest linked to the government's attempts to restrict gin. The most infamous, known broadly as the gin riots, saw mobs attack excise officers, burn effigies of magistrates, and loot warehouses. To the poor, the laws felt like theft disguised as morality, an assault on the only comfort they could afford. You see that truth now, up close. The mob turns down Holborn Hill, dragging the broken cart behind them like a trophy. A man waves a sign scrawled in soot. "No gin, no king." It makes no sense, yet everyone cheers. Another holds up a child's rattle stuffed with coins, shouting, "They tax our milk, they tax our breath, let them tax our corpses next." You push through the throng, heart pounding. A barrel tips, spilling its contents onto the cobblestones. People drop to their knees again, scraping at puddles with spoons. You can't tell if they're desperate or simply drunk on the madness of it all. A constable appears, swinging his baton. He manages 3 steps before someone hurls a brick. The crowd surges, swallowing him whole. When they part again, he's gone. The air crackles with rage and gin fumes. You stumble into an alley where a group of women gather around a makeshift fire. One ladles steaming gin punch from a copper pot, passing it to anyone who wants it. "For the cause," she shouts. "Drink for freedom." It is what's became of cries. You take a cup. It burns like rebellion. Beside you, an old man mutters. "They say Parliament drinks brandy while they make laws against gin. They think they can civilize us with sermons." He spits into the fire. "Let's see how civilized they are when we burn their houses." To have another intense one with self and for enderint. You look into his eyes and see the reflection of flames not yet lit but already promised. The mob reaches the Strand by dusk. Windows smash, shopkeepers bar doors. A group of men overturns a coach belonging to a magistrate rumored to have supported the Gin Act. They beat it with sticks until it splinters. One man climbs atop it and declares himself King Juniper I. The crowd crowns him with a wreath of ivy and cheers. Historians still argue whether the riots were spontaneous or organized. Some claim distillers paid agitators to stir the mob. Others insist it was pure explosion, years of hunger and humiliation igniting at once. Whatever the cause, the result was anarchy wrapped in euphoria. A quirky tidbit survives in a constable's report. Women in lace and beggars in rags alike drank together from gutters, singing as though it were church. You can believe it. You've seen it now. Night falls, but the city glows brighter than ever, orange with firelight, silver with broken glass. You hear distant gunfire. The militia has been called. Somewhere in the smoke, bells toll again, perhaps in warning, perhaps in despair. You find yourself near Street Martin's, where a group of men are trying to roll a confiscated barrel into the square. It's too heavy. They grunt and curse. Then one lights a torch. "Stop!" you shout, but your voice vanishes into the roar. The torch touches the barrel. For a second, nothing happens, then a roar of blue flame erupts. The heat blasts against your face. People scream and scatter. The fire leaps from gin-soaked stones to the wooden stalls, to the walls, to the sky. Within minutes, the entire square is burning. You run, coughing, eyes streaming. Behind you, the crowd turns its fury on the nearest excise office. Bricks fly, windows shatter. You hear the crash of furniture, the splinter of wood, the cheers of 1,000 people finally louder than their hunger. The fire spreads faster than rumor. By midnight, London is a fever dream. Soldiers march in from Westminster, their red coats blackened by soot. The mob hurls bottles, stones, insults. The soldiers raise muskets. The crack of gunfire cuts through the chaos like punctuation marks in a sentence written by madness. You see people fall and vanish underfoot. The smell of gin mingles with the stench of smoke and flesh. The watchmen, those weary ghosts of the city, try to ring their bells, shouting fire and murder. But no one listens. The noise drowns everything. You duck into a doorway, clutching your sleeve to your mouth. Through the haze, you glimpse a woman cradling a broken bottle like a relic. "They can take our bread," she sobs, "but not our drink." She raises it in salute, then disappears into the smoke. At dawn, the fires are still burning. The rain begins slow at first, then steady, washing the soot from rooftops but not from memory. The soldiers stand guard over charred ruins, faces expressionless. The surviving rioters stumble home through puddles that shimmer faintly with gin, as if the city itself were bleeding intoxication. You walk past a burned warehouse where barrels have exploded, spilling their contents into the street. A dog laps at the puddles, then collapses. You look away. In Covent Garden, a preacher climbs a crate and shouts, "Behold the wages of sin." No one stops. No one listens. The sermon comes too late. Later, Parliament declares victory. New measures are announced, new taxes promised. The newspapers speak of order restored, though the photographs, if cameras had existed, would have told a different story. Blackened bricks, empty eyes, the ghosts of the poor. But you know what the officials don't say aloud. The people may have lost the riot, but they've won the message. The government learns its lesson not to ban gin, but to control it. Within a few years, the laws will soften. Licensed distilleries will open again, respectable, taxed, and profitable. The rebellion failed, but the industry thrived. History is fond of such ironies. You sit on a step near the Thames, watching the smoke drift over the water. A woman beside you offers a flask. "For the nerves," she says. You hesitate, then take it. The liquid tastes of ash and salt. She stares at the river. "They'll build again," she says quietly. "They always do." "Do you think it was worth it?" you ask. She shrugs. "Nothing's worth it. But we did it anyway." You pass the flask back. She drinks, wipes her mouth, and disappears into the fog. Historians still argue whether the gin riots were an act of desperation or the first whisper of political revolt. Some call it the cry of the forgotten, others, the tantrum of addiction. But walking these streets, you understand something deeper. It wasn't about gin at all. It was about dignity sold and taxed by the ounce. A government can starve a man, but when it takes away the thing that lets him forget his hunger, it invites a fire no law can quench. By nightfall, the city begins to settle. The fires smolder, the cries fade. You walk past soldiers, extinguishing embers with buckets of river water. One hums the same marching tune you heard days ago, though slower now, quieter, almost mournful. You glance toward the horizon. The sky glows faintly pink, as if the sunrise itself were embarrassed. A pamphlet drifts by your boot, charred at the edges. You pick it up. The headline reads, "Madame Geneva Strikes Back." Beneath it, a crude drawing shows a woman crowned in flames. laughing while London burns. You almost smile. She's won again. That night, as the rain finally washes the last of the fire's glow into the gutters, you lie awake listening to the city breathe. The silence feels heavy, exhausted. Somewhere, a child cries. Somewhere else, someone laughs too hard. Life resumes. You wonder if anyone will remember the riot a century from now, or if it will be reduced, like everything else, to an anecdote told over a drink. Maybe that's the final triumph of gin. No matter how many laws, sermons, or flames try to destroy it, it always distills itself back into the bloodstream of the story. You close your eyes, and in the fading hum of rain, you can still hear it, whisper soft, seductive, invincible. Drink and forget, forget and forgive. Forgive and drink again. The city obeys. The flames have cooled, the soot washed from the stones, and yet the air still feels scorched by something invisible. You can smell the ghost of gin in every wet alley, a faint perfume clinging to the brickwork, as if the city itself refuses to sober up. London, chastened but unrepentant, rises from its own ashes, this time dressed in a cleaner shirt, a steadier smile, and an even cleverer lie. The riot, Parliament claims, has changed everything. New taxes, new licenses, new morality. Gin will now be respectable. You repeat that word to yourself, respectable, as you walk past a shop window where glass decanters glitter like reliquaries. The labels read Gentleman's Geneva, Virtue's Cordial, and Temperate Spirit. The same poison, but dressed for church. A boy in a waistcoat stands outside offering samples from a silver tray. Would you care for a sip, sir? Distilled by honest men for honest hearts. You take the cup. It's smoother than the street gin of years past. It's burned dulled by citrus and sugar. The lie is smooth too. Respectable, you murmur. He grins. Just so, sir. Even the parson drinks it now. A mainstream fact. By the 1760s, gin's reputation began to recover. The gin acts had succeeded in reducing street-level chaos, but they also paved the way for legitimate businesses. Licensed distillers emerged, producing purer spirits under government oversight. Advertisements proclaimed gin as a civilized refreshment for the middle class, a safe indulgence for industrious men and domestic women. The same drink once blamed for madness was now marketed as a symbol of progress. You walk through Cheapside and count 6 new gin shops in a single row, each boasting respectability with painted signs and neatly dressed clerks. Gone are the rickety stalls and gutter-side cups. Now the walls are paneled in oak, the bottles arranged like soldiers. Customers pay with coins that shine instead of clink. Behind the counter, a woman pours gin into small glasses shaped like tulips. No more drunks here, she says proudly. Just gentlemen. You look around. The men sipping quietly at tables are well-groomed, well-fed, and probably well-practiced in pretending moderation. Their eyes have the same dull gleam you saw years ago in Gin Lane, only now it's hidden behind politeness. You step outside and find a pamphlet nailed to a post. The Spirit of Temperance. How the Englishman Can Drink Without Disgrace. It reads like scripture. Let gin be taken not as vice, but as virtue in measure and aid to labor, a friend to cheer, a companion to domestic bliss. You laugh aloud. Only London could baptize sin with ink and call it reform. At the next corner, you find something stranger still. A gin shop run entirely by women. They wear bonnets and crisp aprons, their smiles trained into serenity. A sign above the door declares, Virtue and Company, purveyors of domestic spirits. Inside, the air smells faintly of lavender and lemon peel. One of the women greets you. Would you like a cordial, sir? Our juniper elixir is popular among families, even suitable for ladies. You raise an eyebrow. Ladies? Indeed. A teaspoon before bed steadies the nerves. You glance at the other customers, women in fine dresses, whispering behind fans as they sip from delicate cups. For the first time in decades, gin is not scandalous for women. It is medicinal, fashionable, feminine. You take a sip of the elixir and feel history itself smirking. Historians still argue whether this transformation was genuine morality or brilliant marketing. Some say the middle class truly embraced sobriety and moderation. Others claim they merely found subtler ways to indulge. The truth lies, as always, in the space between the polite lie that keeps society from tripping over its own conscience. A quirky tidbit appears in the journals of one distiller. He renamed his brand, the Angel's Tear, to distance it from the vulgar associations of gin. His sales tripled. When asked later if he believed in angels, he laughed. Only the ones who pay in guineas. You visit one of the new grand distilleries on the outskirts of the city. It gleams like a cathedral of copper and glass. A guide leads you through the echoing halls, explaining the process in reverent tones. No adulterants, no turpentine, no street mash. We use only the finest grain and purest water. You nod, though you notice the workers' faces, sweaty, hollow-eyed, hands raw from scrubbing copper stills. Progress has its altar boys. The guide points proudly to a mural on the wall. Britannia holding a juniper branch, smiling serenely over ships at sea. Our spirit, he declares, represents the refinement of the nation. You think of the riots, of the fires, of the women drinking from gutters. You think of how easily memory can be polished into myth. Refinement, you echo. Yes, I see. Outside, posters advertise the new respectable gin parlors of London. You decide to visit one that evening. The parlor glows like a theater, lit by chandeliers that cast light soft enough to flatter even the most exhausted faces. Couples sit in velvet booths, murmuring over crystal glasses. A small orchestra plays Handel, or something pretending to be him. The menu lists cordial tonic, juniper harmony, and merchant's rest. Not a single drink is called gin, yet everyone is gin in disguise. A gentleman at the next table raises his glass to you. Progress, my friend, he says. We've turned vice into virtue. England leads the world in refinement. You ask him what he does for a living. Finance, he replies with pride. I invest in distilleries. Fine profit, clean conscience. You ask if he's ever visited the old districts, Street Giles, Holborn, the places where gin once ruled. He shakes his head. No need. That's the past. London has grown up. You look around at the chandeliers, the silk, the laughter that sounds just a shade too loud. Yes, you say, it certainly has. Outside, the fog curls along the streets again, soft as memory. You pass an alley where a beggar huddles, clutching a tin cup. The scent of juniper drifts faintly from it. The contrast is brutal. One street glows with chandeliers, the next reeks of despair. The city has divided its sins neatly gilded vice for the rich, invisible ruin for the poor. A reformer might call it progress. You call it choreography. A mainstream historian once wrote that London sobered because its poor learned virtue. You laugh when you remember it. The poor didn't learn virtue. They simply couldn't afford vice anymore. Gin's price rose with its reputation. What was once the people's poison became the gentleman's aperitif. Poverty was never cured, just priced out of sight. You walk past a window displaying the latest advertising sensation. Madame Geneva Reborn. The poster shows a smiling woman in classical robes, holding a cup of glowing liquid. Beneath it, the slogan, "From vice to virtue, refined by progress." You stop and stare. The face is beautiful, serene, and eerily familiar. She's the same Madame Geneva who once lay sprawled in Hogarth's Gin Lane, reborn now as goddess instead of corpse. The city has forgiven her, because she learned to smile. That night, you wander to the river. The Thames glitters under the moon, its surface calm, its depths filthy. A fitting metaphor. Ships creak at anchor, their holds heavy with barrels bound for export. British gin, the pride of civilization, now sails to the colonies, carrying with it the same oblivion that once drowned London's poor. A dockworker nearby smokes his pipe. Funny, ain't it, he says. Used to hang folks for brewing it here. Now they ship it out by the ton and call it glory. Things are way. You ask if he drinks it himself. He grins. Only when I'm feeling patriotic. As dawn creeps in, you find yourself near the old sites again. Street Giles looks cleaner now, rebuilt after the riots, but the ghosts haven't left. You pass a new church funded by a distiller's donation. Its cornerstone bears an inscription, "To God, who gave us juniper." You stand there a long time, uncertain whether to laugh or bow. Inside, the pews gleam with polish. The vicar preaches about moderation, about temperance as a mark of national pride. You catch only fragments: industry, virtue, self-control. He sounds less like a man of God and more like a merchant rehearsing his sales pitch. You leave quietly, letting the sermon fade behind you. Outside, children chase one another through the street, their laughter ringing clear and bright. One stops, stoops, and picks up a discarded gin bottle. It's empty, but he pretends to drink, staggering playfully. The others giggle. "Madame Geneva," they shout. "Save us. There's some daughter." You can't help but smile and shiver. Historians still debate whether London truly changed or merely learned better manners. Was the city redeemed? Or did it simply rename its vices to fit its mirrors? Perhaps redemption is just rebranding with better handwriting. A quirky story lingers in local folklore. They say, one night, a man walking near Covent Garden saw a woman's reflection in a gin shop window. A woman smiling faintly, wearing a crown of ivy. When he turned, no one was there. The next morning, he found the glass unbroken, but the reflection missing. They say Madame Geneva left the window for good that night, no longer needing to be seen to rule. You walk home through the gray dawn. Behind you, the city hums with commerce, cleanliness, and the faint perfume of juniper. Ahead lies the next chapter, sleeker still, more refined, and no less intoxicated. You realize that London didn't kill Madame Geneva after all. It married her, dressed her in lace, and introduced her to polite society. She changed her name, learned her manners, and bought herself a townhouse. Respectability, it seems, is just sin with better lighting. You whisper into the fog, "Welcome back, my lady." And from somewhere deep in the city's veins, you swear you hear a soft reply, sweet and mocking as ever. "Did I ever leave?" Sapper and Kaiser. The smell of the city changes before its voice does. You notice it one morning as you walk along the Thames embankment, less of the sour, molasses reek that once clung to gin shops, more of something crisp and metallic, like copper warmed by sunlight. The air tastes cleaner, the laughter sharper, the ambition quieter but deeper. Somewhere nearby, machinery hums with mathematical precision. You follow the sound to a new kind of distillery, a palace of industry, not intoxication. It rises from the docks like a cathedral of progress. Iron rafters, glass skylights, floors scrubbed to a scientific shine. You enter through doors emblazoned with gold lettering, Sirs Thomas and Henry, distillers of the finest London dry gin. Inside, the air is hot with steam and juniper, but beneath the familiar scent lies a note of something else. Order. No sloshing barrels, no barefoot workers, no secret flasks. Here, men in linen coats move with the precision of clockwork. A supervisor greets you with a courteous bow. "You're just in time," he says, gesturing proudly. "We've completed a full run this morning, 500 gallons of the cleanest spirit in Christendom." He says, cleanest, the way a bishop might say holiest. "My now is safely, when the Asian reprively, in part of distaflar." A mainstream fact. The invention of London dry gin in the late 18th and early 19th centuries marked a technological and moral turning point. New distillation methods, especially the use of copper stills and charcoal filtration, produced a purer, more stable spirit. It needed no sugar to disguise impurities, so it tasted drier, crisper, and more refined. It was the first gin that could be bottled clear and proud. A product of science rather than sin. You watch the process unfold. Copper stills gleam under lamplight, their curved bellies sweating faintly with heat. Coils of tubing snake across the floor, carrying vapor that condenses into crystal clarity. The workers speak in quiet tones, as if reverence itself could improve yield. The supervisor taps a thermometer. "We keep her steady at 68 degrees. Science, my friend, science is the true temperance." He offers you a sample in a clean glass. The spirit bites like frost, sharp but elegant. It leaves no residue, no sweetness, only a whisper of juniper that lingers like memory. "See," he says, "no vice, no filth, pure as the empire's conscience." You take another sip. It burns the same as ever, only more politely. Outside, wagons wait to transport barrels stamped with proud words, "London Dry." The name feels like both an advertisement and an absolution. A boy unloading casks hums a tune you half recognize. It's an old gin ballad, slowed to something almost respectable. "They pay us in coin now," he says, wiping his brow. "Used to be they paid in gin. Progress, they call it." You ask if he drinks the new spirit. "Only on Sundays," he says, grinning. "It's too fine for thirst." The phrase lingers in your mind, too fine for thirst. Perhaps that's what progress really means. Turning necessity into luxury, hunger into hobby. You walk east toward the heart of the city. The new gin palaces rise everywhere, white marble, gilt trim, frosted glass. Each one looks like a cross between a temple and a bank. Inside, gaslights sparkle on polished mirrors, multiplying the glow until the walls themselves seem drunk with light. The clientele are clerks, tradesmen, even a few officers in uniform, respectable drinkers of a respectable drink. You order a glass of the new London Dry, neat. The bartender nods approvingly. No fruit? No syrup, sir? Proper way. The liquid gleams like liquid glass. You raise it, and for a moment, you glimpse your own reflection, bent by the curvature of the glass, clearer, harsher, unfamiliar. A group of gentlemen beside you discuss the purification of the spirit with the fervor of philosophers. One declares, "This is modernity in a bottle. None of that sweet rot from the old days. This is virtue distilled." Another adds, "It's what made Britain great: discipline, refinement, efficiency." You murmur. And denial. They don't hear you, or pretend not to. The third man, red-cheeked and sincere, raises his glass. "To progress, and in no chief referent, intend use for call it into dale." Formosant, you clink glasses with him, feeling the chill run down your wrist. Progress, you think, always comes in clear bottles. Historians still debate who deserves credit for inventing London Dry. Some name Charles Tanqueray, who established his distillery in 1830. Others credit the Gordons, who perfected the recipe decades earlier. Whoever it was, they gave England its favorite paradox, a drink that promised purity through intoxication. A quirky story survives from the earliest advertisements. One brand's poster depicted a pristine waterfall labeled, "The Stream of Civilization," pouring directly into a gin bottle. The caption read, "Drink what the angels would, if angels were English." You imagine Hogarth rolling in his grave, chuckling through his coffin wood. You find yourself later that day near the docks again, watching workers load crates, bound for the far corners of empire. India, Australia, Canada, all thirsty for the taste of civilization. They call it London Dry, one sailor says. But it's never dry where it goes. The crew laughs. Someone passes around a flask. Someone else coughs, then drinks again. The world spins outward from the river, carrying juniper and irony in equal measure. You look out across the water and wonder how many colonies will inherit this particular form of British virtue. A cure for homesickness, a salve for guilt, a quiet way to forget what empire really costs. That night, you visit a chemist who also happens to be a distiller, one of the new breed of scientific gentlemen. His laboratory glows with blue fire from Bunsen burners. Glass tubes bubble and sigh. He greets you with enthusiasm. "My dear sir, behold, precision, purity, perfection." He gestures to a still so polished it reflects his grin. "We finally banished the barbarism from drink." You ask if he's tasted his creation. He hesitates. "Not personally, but I've charted its composition to 3 decimal places. Mathematics doesn't lie." You laugh. "But men do." It's sprained to them alder. He blinks, unsure whether to take offense. You sip from his beaker and smile. The gin is exquisite and utterly soulless. It tastes like efficiency distilled, like a machine's idea of pleasure. Outside his workshop, the city hums with evening activity. Gas lights flicker. Hansom cabs rattle along the cobblestones. Everywhere you look, posters proclaim the virtues of London Dry. Pure, honest English. The irony is almost elegant. You remember when those same words were used to condemn gin. In a tavern near Fleet Street, a printer explains it best. "We English don't abolish our vices," he says. "We professionalize them." He raises his glass and adds, "See, even ruin's got manners now." You drink with him, though you can't help noticing that the gin still burns, just as it did in the slums of Street Giles. The taste of progress, it seems, is eternal. By midnight, London glows brighter than you've ever seen it. Gaslight paints the streets in gold and silver. Reflections ripple in every puddle. The old darkness feels banished, or perhaps just better lit. The city hums like a great still, endlessly distilling its own contradictions. You wander through the Strand and catch fragments of laughter, the clink of glasses, the hiss of steam engines from distant factories. All of it merges into one rhythmic pulse, slow, relentless, mechanical. You realize that the age of chaos has ended. The age of control has begun. The riots are gone. The sermons silent. The the gutters dry. London has learned to intoxicate itself in moderation, which is to say, perpetually. A soldier from a nearby garrison passes you on the bridge. His uniform is immaculate. His breath smells faintly of gin. London dry, he says proudly when you ask. Keeps the malaria away, they say. You smile. From the soul or the body, he laughs. Both, if you're clever. He salutes and strides away into the mist. His boots echo like a heartbeat fading into history. The next morning, you stand by the window of a coffee house and watch a group of clerks start their day. They're clean-shaven, serious, disciplined, the very image of the New England. Yet, as they sit down, one discreetly pours a clear liquid from a small flask into his tea. No scent gives him away. No one looks up. You sip your own coffee and realize that gin has achieved its final victory: invisibility. No more riots, no more ruin, no more sermons, only quiet consumption disguised as civility. The perfect British compromise. Historians will later call this the birth of the modern age, the moment vice merged with virtue, and the world learned to market both together. But standing here, you can feel something else, a kind of sadness beneath the shine, a longing for the chaos that once made London alive. Perfection is sterile. Even sin, when bottled and labeled, loses its flavor. You think of Madame Geneva, that phantom queen of ruin, now reincarnated as a brand logo, smiling demurely from every shop window. The city worships her still, only now they call it taste. As dusk falls, you walk once more to the river. The water glimmers beneath the setting sun, catching the reflections of 1,000 clean, respectable windows. You breathe in deeply. The scent of juniper lingers, faint and eternal. Woven into the fog, you whisper to the city, "You've grown up, haven't you? Thanks for watching." And somewhere in the hum of steam and machinery, in the click of glasses and the sigh of copper stills, you imagine a voice replying, older now, smoother, but unmistakably hers. "I only refine myself, darling. I never quit." When the Aftermaster came down to recall, the city looks sober in the morning, but you've learned not to trust appearances. Beneath its polished streets, beneath the crisp accents and brass door knockers, something unsettled still throbs like a headache that refuses to fade. You can hear it in the hush that follows laughter, see it in the tremor of a hand refilling a glass that was supposed to stay empty. London, even in its refinement, still sweats gin through its pores. The people call this progress. You call it a hangover. You walk down Holborn Hill, where once the mob howled for Madame Geneva, and find only quiet respectability now. The shops are clean, the signs professional, the barrels replaced by marble counters. Yet, every so often, you catch a flicker of the old ghosts. A cracked gin bottle glinting in the gutter. A woman laughing too loudly at nothing. A child humming a tune from Gin Lane. The city may have sobered, but it has not forgotten. A mainstream fact. After the gin craze ended and London Dry emerged, Britain faced the social consequences of nearly a century of intoxication. The damage lingered in orphanages overflowing with gin's forgotten children, in hospitals treating those whose bodies never recovered from the years of cheap spirits, and in prisons filled with petty thieves, driven to crime by drink or by withdrawal. The gin craze may have ended, but its shadow sprawled long over Georgian society. You see that shadow in every brick of the new workhouses. The building before you looms like a punishment carved into stone. Men in ragged coats shuffle inside, women clutch thin shawls against the wind. A matron shouts for order. You follow them through the doorway. Inside, the air smells of boiled cabbage and disinfectant sobriety distilled into misery. A preacher stands at the front, his voice echoing, "Vice has consequences, brothers and sisters. Let the ruin of gin teach you righteousness, and a slave de steen, that was seen divine." You glance around. No one meets his eyes. The people nod dutifully, but their faces are pale and hollow. They're sober, yes, but joyless. You whisper to yourself, "We cured the fever by killing the patient." In the corner, a child fidgets. His mother hushes him. "Be still, love." You notice her trembling hands. They shake not from drink but from the memory of it. When she catches you watching, she offers a faint smile. "They say we should be grateful," she murmurs. But gratitude doesn't warm you. She looks down at her boy. "My husband drank himself into the river. They gave me a place here," said, "It's a new beginning." She laughs softly. Feels more like a museum for ghosts. You want to tell her that she's right, that London has become one vast memorial to its own indulgence. But instead, you just nod. Outside, the fog rolls in from the Thames. You walk past the hospital near Street Giles, where the physicians have begun documenting the effects of prolonged gin consumption. You glance at a chart pinned to a wall, ink sketches of swollen livers, ulcered stomachs, trembling hands. The caption reads, "Moral degeneration, observed in the lower classes." You shake your head. Science has taken the place of sermons, but the tone hasn't changed. The poor remain the subject, never the speaker. A doctor walks by, adjusting his spectacles. "We call it gin palsy," he says matter-of-factly. "Years of cheap spirit, terrible on the nerves, but fascinating, medically speaking." He gestures toward a patient lying on a cot, eyes half closed, body twitching. "We learn a great deal from them. There is Flight the 70s one. For Mayo." You ask, "And do they learn anything from you?" He blinks. "About what?" You don't answer. He wouldn't understand the question. Later, you walk to the outskirts, where the city ends and its consequences begin. There, the orphanages stand in neat rows, monuments to absence. You hear the echo of children singing inside, their voices thin but steady. A matron leads them in hymn, "The Lord giveth bread, but the devil gave gin, so we pray for the one, and forget what we've been." The song trails out into the gray air. You peer through the window. The children's faces are clean, their hair trimmed short. But when the hymn ends, you catch one girl whispering to another, "My mum sang that too, only she was laughing." They giggle, and the matron hushes them sharply. Historians still debate whether the post-gin craze moral reforms genuinely uplifted the poor or simply replaced one form of control with another. Some argue the state saved lives, others insist it merely changed chains. The gin bottle was taken from their hands, but the freedom to forget was taken too. A quirky report from 1,782 records that one parish banned gin shops within its borders only for beer houses to double in number within a month. Temperance, the writer noted dryly, is rarely more than substitution. You smile grimly. The English don't stop drinking, they just change the label. In the evening, you cross Blackfriars Bridge, watching the gaslights shimmer on the river. Beneath you, the Thames flows dark and endless, carrying away the dregs of another century. You imagine it whispering, carrying stories, not water. A man leans beside you, staring into the current. "Used to sell gin down there," he says, nodding toward the docks, "before they cleaned it all up. And if we have not 2 rupees, what do you sell now?" you ask. He shrugs. "Soap. Same customers, different product. Everyone's still trying to wash something off." You laugh quietly, but his face stays solemn. "You think they'll ever stop?" he asks. You look out over the river, its surface reflecting the lamps like scattered coins. Not while there's something to forget. You spend the next day wandering the new prisons. They call them reform institutions, now places of correction, not punishment. The language is prettier, the walls are not. A guard leads you down the corridor, his lantern casting long shadows on the brick. "Used to be we filled the cells with drunkards," he says. "Now it's thieves and debtors." "Progress, you say?" He chuckles. "Aye. Same souls, different crimes. By will most case." He stops at one cell. Inside sits an old man, hands clasped, lips moving silently. A half-empty flask sits beside him. "Contraband, you ask?" The guard shrugs. "Confiscated it 3 times. He just keeps making more. Says it's for his rheumatism." "Head." The old man looks up, his eyes sharp. "It's for my memories," he says. You nod, understanding perfectly. In the next wing, you see something even stranger, a group of inmates in a temperance class. They sit in a circle while a chaplain lectures them about the virtues of sobriety. His words are earnest, but his audience is restless. One man finally interrupts. "If the Almighty didn't want us drinking, he wouldn't have made juniper." The chaplain sighs. "He made serpents too." The prisoner grins. "And they only bit the proud." The others laugh. The chaplain doesn't. That night, you sit in a tavern, not a rowdy gin dive, but a polished establishment serving moderate refreshments. The crowd is older, quieter, haunted. You listen as 2 men talk near you. One says, "They tell us gin ruined a generation." "Thank you for watching that one, nude." And Rabida Frenchin, beceive the friend. The other replies, maybe the generation was already ruined, and Jin just told the truth. You raise your glass half full, always half full, and silently toast them. Outside, a soft drizzle begins. The rain blurs the lamps into halos. You wander past a newspaper stand, the headlines shouting about progress. Temperance Society opens new chapter in Chelsea, and England leads the world in moral reform. You buy a copy. Tucked inside, a smaller notice catches your eye. Child found dead by river bottle nearby. You fold the paper quietly and walk on. Some stories, you think, will never need ink to stay written. By the time you reach Street Paul's, the bells are tolling. Inside, the pews are filled for evening service. The sermon tonight is about redemption. The preacher's voice echoes up into the dome. We have conquered the vice that once enslaved this city. We are purified, disciplined, righteous. The congregation murmurs approval. You close your eyes and listen, and for a moment, you swear the walls themselves sigh. Historians will later quote sermons like this as evidence of the nation's moral awakening. But you, standing there, know better. It isn't redemption, it's exhaustion. The city isn't reborn. It's just tired of confessing. You step back outside into the cool air. Across the street, a group of children play marbles. One of them, a little girl with tangled hair, holds up a marble that gleams faintly green. It's my lucky Jin gem, she says proudly. The others laugh. There's no such thing, but she tucks it into her pocket like treasure. You smile as she runs off. The hangover may last, but so does imagination. A quirky tidbit. In the 1790 seconds, some distillers began producing temperance tonics, made from juniper, but without alcohol marketed, to the reformed middle class. They failed spectacularly. Without spirit, one critic wrote, there is neither solace nor sin. London seemed to agree. Even in repentance, the city refused purity. As night settles, you wander back toward Fleet Street. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and rain, but beneath it, always beneath it, is the ghost of juniper. The sound of distant laughter filters through the fog. You pause at an intersection, caught between two Londons, one glittering with progress, one haunted by its past. The streets are the same, the people are the same, the thirst is the same, only the language has changed. You whisper, this is what healing looks like then. And the city, patient and unbothered, seems to answer, no, love. This is what forgetting looks like. Inhaben body professors, and no life for life. As you make your way home, the fog thickens, wrapping London in gauze. Somewhere, a musician plays a slow tune on a violin. The melody drifts through the night, melancholy, endless. You stop listening. It sounds almost like a lullaby, or perhaps a lament. Either way, it feels fitting. After all, every hangover ends with sleep. You exhale, watching your breath mingle with the mist. The air tastes faintly of juniper still. It always will. The dawn arrives colder than usual, edged with the scent of coal and ambition. London's skyline no longer belches smoke from the crude backyard stills of the poor, but from the iron chimneys of invention. Where once gin flowed like lawless rain, now steam itself is the new intoxication. You stand on a bridge, watching fog and factory smoke mingle until the city looks like it's exhaling dreams, half sober, half delirious. The age of reason has finally caught up with the age of ruin. Scientists, real ones, with notebooks and spectacles now talk about spirit purity and botanical balance, the way alchemists once whispered about eternal life. You can almost hear the pride in their voices. The human mind has domesticated intoxication. It's no longer sin or salvation, it's chemistry. And chemistry, as everyone keeps saying, doesn't lie. You wander through a lecture hall at the Royal Institution, where a professor in powdered wig and ink-stained fingers delivers a sermon disguised as science. Gentlemen, he declares, rapping his pointer against a blackboard. Gin is not the devil's creation, it is man's miscalculation. When impurely made, it poisons. When refined, it civilizes. The students murmur approval. The blackboard gleams with chalk equations, ratios of ethanol to water, the ideal temperature for vaporization, notes on botanical oils. You recognize the rhythm of theology masquerading as progress. The professor continues, it is our duty, as enlightened men, to apply reason where once there was indulgence. A nation that distills its spirits with precision, distills its soul likewise. A few nod solemnly. as if he's just proposed sainthood through thermodynamics. You almost laugh. A mainstream fact, the late Georgian and early Victorian eras saw the rise of scientific distillation. The coffee still, invented in 1830, revolutionized production, allowing continuous distillation of pure, consistent alcohol. Gin became cleaner, safer, and far more profitable. Meanwhile, medical and temperance movements emerged, seeking to replace superstition with rational sobriety. Doctors wrote treatises warning of alcoholic paralysis, while reformers lobbied for moral chemistry, a balance between indulgence and restraint. You attend a demonstration of the new coffee still at a distillery along the river. It's taller than a house, a column of gleaming metal pulsing with steam. The engineer, a lean man with soot on his collar, beams with pride. "No more rotgut," he says. "No more poison. The age of precision has come." He offers you a glass of the output crystal clear, almost scentless. "Taste perfection," he says. You sip. It's smooth, flawless, and utterly soulless. Like the city itself, it has polished away all memory of chaos. "Does it still get people drunk?" you ask. He blinks, surprised by the question. "Naturally." "Then the spirit's the same," you reply. He frowns, as though you've missed the point. But you suspect he's the one who has. Across town, the temperance societies are growing louder. They print pamphlets illustrated with skulls and devils, declaring alcohol the enemy of industry. The meetings draw crowds of factory workers, housewives, even children. In one hall, a man stands on stage holding a bottle of gin aloft, like a captured weapon. "Brothers and sisters," he shouts. "The devil has worn many faces in England, but none so smiling as this." The crowd cheers. He smashes the bottle against the pulpit. Shards scatter like baptismal water. "No more spirits for the spiritless." You stand in the back, listening. The fervor feels familiar, too familiar. The city has replaced intoxication with moral zeal, but the energy is the same. It's still a kind of drunkenness. Only now the drink is righteousness. Beside you, an older woman mutters, "They'll find another bottle soon enough. They always do." You turn to her. "And you?" She shrugs. "I prefer my devils honest." Historians still argue whether temperance was a moral revolution or a class weapon. Some say it saved the working poor from ruin. Others claim it robbed them of the only joy they could afford. Reformers spoke of salvation, but often what they meant was obedience. A quirky anecdote survives from 1834. A temperance preacher accidentally mistook tonic syrup for gin and drank a full glass during his sermon. Realizing too late, he paused, blushed, and declared, "The devil is less wicked than expected." The congregation applauded anyway. You leave the rally and wander into a coffee house, a sober man's refuge. Inside, clerks debate railroads, politics, and science as if they're all interchangeable. Coffee, not gin, fuels their fervor. Steam rises from cups, from street grates, from their very words. The city hums on caffeine and conscience. One man boasts, "We've replaced the tavern with the telegraph." Another laughs. A sober empire is an efficient one. You glance at their trembling hands, at the empty eyes that never quite rest. They've traded one addiction for another. Progress is just intoxication rebranded. Later that afternoon, you visit a laboratory behind a distillery, where a young chemist tests new botanical enhancements. He lines up jars of coriander, angelica, cardamom, orris root, and bitter orange peel. Each has its virtue, he explains eagerly. Science makes even pleasure measurable. He opens one jar, lets you inhale. The scent is heady, earthy, alive. "See? Balance, harmony, proportion? Like virtue itself," you murmur. "Exactly," he says, not catching your irony. "We are no longer slaves to instinct. We are architects of enjoyment. We are architects of enjoyment." You wonder how long before architects forget why they build. By evening, you find yourself at a dinner hosted by one of the city's new men, a gin magnate turned philanthropist. His townhouse gleams with mirrors and candelabras. Servants glide silently between guests, carrying silver trays of tonic and London dry cocktails. The conversation sparkles, too practiced to be spontaneous. The host raises his glass. "Gentlemen, to science and sobriety, the twin pillars of our empire." There are spaces and time. You notice his wife's hand tremble as she sets her glass down. barely touched. Across the table, a bishop nods approvingly. Yes, he says, and may the lower orders learn the same restraint. The host smiles. They will, when they can afford to. Everyone laughs politely. You do not. After dinner, the host gives you a tour of his private study. The walls are lined with ledgers, patents, and maps. He points to a globe. Our gin now reaches Bombay, Sydney, Cape Town. We've civilized the tropics one bottle at a time. Be Persetti, you ask quietly. Do you ever wonder if they wanted civilization? He blinks, puzzled. Everyone wants improvement. Even if it burns going down? He chuckles. That's progress. If it burns, it works. We haven't served you. To 19 Hopper. You run your hand over the globe's polished surface, tracing trade routes that look eerily like veins. The empire's bloodstream runs on juniper and denial. The next morning, you walk the docks again. The crates now bear tidy stencils, tonic water, medicinal. You watch sailors load them beside barrels of gin. The doctors say it keeps off fever, one jokes. From what? Another asks. Conscience. They laugh. You don't. You think about the chemists, the engineers, the reformers all working toward purification, while the same thirst spreads outward, unseen. Gin has become moral, medicinal, imperial, but you know its nature hasn't changed. It never will. You find a group of missionaries preparing to depart for India. Their trunks overflow with pamphlets about temperance and bottles of tonic. The lead missionary beams. We shall teach them moderation. You nod toward the gin crates beside their luggage. And how will you practice it? No, Tan. He doesn't answer. That night, a fog rolls over the river again. It carries the smell of coal, lime, and juniper. London's Trinity. You stand by the railing, watching the lights blur into halos. In the distance, the hum of machinery merges with the murmur of the taverns still open along the docks. Science and sin, progress and indulgence, inseparable, eternal. You imagine Madame Geneva, older now, walking unseen through the city in a lab coat instead of a corset, her perfume replaced by antiseptic. She doesn't need to seduce anymore. She's been institutionalized. A mainstream scholar once wrote, "The English spirit was never purified, it was quantified." You think of that now, hearing the rhythmic hiss of the stills, the click of glass against glass, the pulse of industry beneath the cobblestones. The city is a giant distillery, endlessly refining itself, yet never escaping what it truly is. Historians still debate whether science saved London from its vices, or merely gave them better grammar. Some call it enlightenment. Others call it hypocrisy. The truth, as always, distills somewhere in between. A quirky newspaper from 1841 even published a cartoon showing a scientist shaking hands with a demon over a beaker labeled Moral Reform. The caption read, "Purity, with a hint of brimstone." You leave the river and wander toward the outskirts, where fields still stretch between factories. The air is cleaner here, though streaked with the smell of juniper blooming wild. You pluck a sprig, crush it between your fingers, and breathe deeply. The scent is sharp, honest, ancient. You realize that before men turned it into a market, juniper was simply a plant, a quiet survivor on rocky ground. Perhaps that's what gin always was, the soul of something stubborn enough to grow where nothing else would. You smile, tucking the sprig into your coat. "So you endure too," you whisper. The wind stirs, carrying the faintest reply. Like a sigh of distillation escaping a still, "Of course I do. I was never the problem." Back in the city, the gaslights flicker on. You walk past a laboratory window where two chemists toast with clear liquid from test tubes. They clink them like glasses. "To reason," one says. "To spirit," the other answers. You keep walking, shaking your head. The world will never run out of contradictions. It just invents cleaner words for them. The city hums, the machines purr. Somewhere, a temperance preacher finishes his sermon, while a distiller begins his night shift. Science and morality, two ends of the same copper coil, endlessly condensing and evaporating. You can't help but smile. The story, you realize, has never really been about drink. It's about the eternal human hunger to purify what can't be purified, and the sweet, foolish hope that this time, maybe, we'll succeed. You open your eyes to the soft hum of refrigeration instead of the clatter of horses. The air smells faintly of citrus peel, alcohol vapor, and electricity. The centuries have changed their clothes, but not their habits. You're in a modern bar now, a descendant of every gin house, tavern and parlor that London ever birthed. The bottles behind the counter stand in perfect ranks, their labels gleaming under LED lights like polished metals. The names are different. Hendricks, Beefeater, Sipsmith. But their ancestry is unmistakable. The bartender wipes a glass with the reverence of a priest polishing a chalice. He's dressed in black with a leather apron, a tattoo of juniper berries winding up his arm. "What'll it be?" he asks, voice smooth as music. You smile. "Surprise me." He nods knowingly, as if he's been expecting you for years. The shaker rattles like distant thunder. Ice clicks, botanicals bloom, and the smell of lemon zest and peppercorn rises like incense. He slides the glass toward you. There you are, London Dry, reborn. You lift it, watching the condensation gather like morning dew. The first sip hits with the same paradox. It always had cold and burning, bitter and floral, civilized and savage. "Still got bite," you say. He grins. "Wouldn't be gin without a bit of bite." The system telling to the self-protection round them. The bar is quiet, yet alive with whispers. A group of suited professionals huddle around a table, laughing too hard about work. A couple clinks glasses in the corner, the glow of their phones reflecting in their drinks. The light from the shelves paints everyone in juniper-tinted gold. You look around and realize this is not a tavern, it's a temple. The language of intoxication has evolved into art. The bartender isn't a peddler but a curator, selling experience instead of escape. The patrons speak of notes, profiles, flavors. Not one calls it what it is, a way to forget politely. A mainstream fact. By the 21st century, gin had become fashionable again. After nearly 2 centuries of decline, a gin renaissance swept through London and beyond. Craft distilleries multiplied, small batch labels appeared, and mixologists elevated the once scorned spirit into a symbol of sophistication. Artisanal botanicals replaced turpentine, and tasting menus replaced street riots. You sip again, tasting time itself. Coriander, angelica root, a touch of lavender, an echo of the scientific precision from the 19th century, wrapped in the aesthetic polish of the 21st. The bartender watches you. "Funny thing," he says, "everyone thinks gin is new again, trendy. But it's always been here like the Thames, sometimes calm, sometimes flooded, but never gone." You nod. "The river just learned better manners." He laughs. "Exactly." On the wall behind him hangs a framed print of Hogarth's Gin Lane. It's been reimagined by a modern artist, sleek, ironic, and washed in pastel tones. The starving mother now holds a martini glass. The crumbling tenements gleam like boutique apartments. The caption reads, "Everything old is artisanal again." You stare at it for a long moment. "Clever," you say. The bartender follows your gaze. People love irony. Makes them feel smarter than the past. "Does it work?" He smirks. "Not once." You wander outside for air. The city glitters. Cars glide where carriages once clattered. The pavements shine with drizzle and reflected neon, each puddle a little mirror of history. You pass a billboard advertising a luxury gin brand. A woman in a silver dress smiles down at you, her glass raised in a frozen toast. The slogan beneath her reads, "Pure London, pure you." You stop walking. Her smile is too perfect, her eyes too knowing. It's Madame Geneva again, reborn in pixels and perfume. Her new throne a skyline of glass towers. You almost expect her to wink. You duck into another bar, smaller, dimmer. The chalkboard lists cocktails named after forgotten eras. The Georgian Dream, Empire's Remedy, the Riot Sour. A man beside you, grizzled and sharp-eyed, stirs his drink thoughtfully. "Ever notice," he says, without looking up, "how we name cocktails after disasters once they're old enough?" You grin. "It's called nostalgia. It tastes better than regret." He chuckles. "History's hangover in a coupe glass. Bracelet of Forder Swag when the melting south." You raise your glass to that. In the far corner, 2 tourists discuss the history of gin, parroting half-remembered facts from travel blogs. "It was really bad stuff back then," one says. "Made people crazy." The other shrugs. "Still does, just with better branding." There was self. They clink glasses and laugh. You smile despite yourself. Even diluted through time, truth has a way of surviving. You leave the bar and walk through Soho, where music thumps from every doorway. Each club and speakeasy is a reincarnation of the same old thirst, dressed differently for every decade. In one, a neon sign flickers. In gin, we trust. Inside, 20-somethings pose for photos with glowing cocktails that look more like potions than drinks. The air smells of lime, perfume, and the faint electric tang of phone screens. You stand among them, invisible, watching. They laugh the way the women in Street Giles once did, carelessly, beautifully, on the edge of something. None of them knows the history beneath their heels. If you told them, they'd smile, maybe post it as trivia. Did you know gin used to kill people? Wild. Then they'd order another round. You realize this is what civilization really means, not forgetting the past, but turning it into entertainment. Historians still argue whether modernity truly liberated humanity from its vices, or merely domesticated them. Some claim we've mastered indulgence through awareness. Others say we've just built prettier cages. You think of that as you pass yet another gin ad, glowing across a bus stop. Botanically balanced, ethically sourced, spiritually refined. The words blur as rain begins to fall. Balanced, ethically, spiritually. You imagine Hogarth adding a new panel to Gin Lane. A man scrolling through his phone, ordering cocktails online, credit card in one hand, conscience in the other. You wander toward the Thames again. The bridges blaze with light. The river hums with reflection. The city is quiet, but not peaceful. You lean against the railing, the same as hundreds of years ago, and watch history fold over itself like ripples in the current. From a nearby rooftop bar comes the faint sound of laughter and clinking glasses. The melody drifts across the water. Still at it then, you whisper, and if the river could answer, it might say, always. I keep the recipe. A mainstream observation. London now boasts more distilleries than at any time since the 1700s. Yet the relationship between spirit and society has inverted. Gin is no longer the poor man's escape, but the artisan's luxury, poured by hand, sipped slowly, priced like a confession. The same juniper that once marked despair now sells aspiration. A quirky tidbit. One distillery recently recreated Gin Lane gin. Distilled using a 1,730 seconds recipe, including wormwood and black pepper. The label proudly warns, may cause historical hallucinations. It sells out every year. You almost buy a bottle. Almost. You find a late-night cafe bar near Covent Garden, where the windows fog with laughter. Inside, a musician plays a slow jazz version of God Save the King. The bartender offers you another drink. No, you say softly. Just water. He nods, unfazed. Still or sparkling? You pause. Whichever one forgets faster. He smiles, like he's heard it all before. The woman next to you orders a gin martini, extra dry. She notices your empty glass. Not drinking tonight? Just listening. To what? Echoes. She tilts her head. From what? This is not redder, and formative alto dio. You glance toward the rows of bottles, glowing like tiny stained glass windows. Everything that came before. She raises her martini. To history, then. You clink her glass gently. To amnesia. Outside, the rain has stopped. The streets shine like liquid mirrors. The smell of juniper drifts faintly from every doorway. You walk slowly, tracing old routes in a new century-past street, Giles, where a plaque now commemorates the gin craze, a lesson in temperance. Tourists pose beside it, smiling, unaware that the cafe next door sells gin-infused croissants. You almost laugh. The city never forgets how to contradict itself. You stop at a small modern distillery tucked between glass towers. Through the window, you watch copper stills gleaming under fluorescent light, their curves identical to the ones you saw 200 years ago. A sign on the door reads, "Tours available. Taste the tradition of innovation." You whisper the words aloud, savoring their absurdity. Tradition of innovation. London's favorite paradox. Inside, a guide gives a speech to a group of visitors. Gin represents craftsmanship, heritage, and creativity. It's not just a drink, it's a conversation with history. He hands out samples in tiny tulip glasses. You accept one, though you already know how it ends. The flavor is exquisite, complex, balanced. But beneath the citrus and juniper, you taste the same thing you always have, the faint burn of longing. You walk back into the night, the city's pulse steady beneath your feet. Every window glows with memory. Some of ruin, some of refinement, all of survival. You think about the mothers who once cradled gin bottles instead of babies. About the reformers who preached salvation. The distillers who dreamed of purity. The soldiers who drank for courage. The rioters who burned for freedom. They're all still here, hidden in the glass. Every pore is a resurrection. You whisper to the night, "You never really changed, did you?" The wind picks up, carrying the faint rattle of ice in distant glasses, and then, almost imperceptibly, a voice seems to murmur from the city itself, playful, familiar, eternal. "Changed? Darling, I only learned to charge extra." You laugh quietly and raise your empty hand, as if in a toast. The neon flickers once, reflecting off the puddles, off the river, off the endless glass. London blinks back at you, wry and knowing, its hangover long gone but its thirst unquenched. And as the night deepens, you walk on through centuries, layered like the botanicals in every bottle, breathing the same old juniper air that built empires, toppled morals, and sweetened the endless ache of being human. The night folds itself around London like a heavy velvet curtain, soft, weighty, threaded with echoes. You walk through it slowly, hearing the muted heartbeat of the city that once drowned itself in gin and now hums on espresso and electricity. The rain has stopped. The air is cool and lucid, the kind of air that makes everything sharper. The click of heels on pavement, the sigh of the Thames beneath the bridges, the faint music leaking from the half-open door of a cocktail bar. You pause, listening to the familiar sound of glass meeting glass. The laughter is quieter than it used to be, measured, civilized, but you recognize the rhythm instantly. It's the same pulse that throbbed through Gin Lane 3 centuries ago, only refined into melody instead of chaos. You smile, because you finally understand what London has been trying to tell you all along. Sobriety isn't silence, it's just another rhythm in the same song. You cross the bridge and lean over the railing. The water glitters faintly, gathering the glow of street lamps like old memories resurfacing. The city's reflection trembles alive, but no longer feverish. You whisper to it, you've finally sobered up. And in the hush that follows, you can almost hear London laugh. The era of intoxication never truly ended. It simply found gentler disguises. Now the gin comes in bottles etched with poetry, its labels printed with promises of mindfulness and botanical purity. Advertisements speak not of escape, but of elevated balance, as though the centuries of ruin were just rehearsal for refinement. People sip slowly now, counting calories, chasing wellness. The rebellion has turned into ritual. But walk far enough into the night, and you still find remnants of the old world shadows that refuse to fade. Near the riverbanks, the homeless wrap themselves in tarps that smell faintly of alcohol. In side streets, clubgoers stagger beneath neon halos, their laughter slurring into something ancient. And somewhere, a man sits alone at a counter, staring into a half-finished gin and tonic, lost in the same fog that swallowed his ancestors. History, like juniper, never fully dissolves. A mainstream fact. By the dawn of the modern age, Britain's relationship with gin had come full circle. The spirit that once symbolized decay became an emblem of national pride and craftsmanship. Its production is now regulated, celebrated, and exported worldwide. But beneath the industry's polished success, the social divides it once magnified still linger. Addiction, poverty, loneliness no longer visible in the streets of Georgian London, but scattered across digital ones instead. You walk into a cafe bar that stays open until dawn. The crowd here isn't drunk but tired students, insomniacs, night workers nursing quiet drinks or black coffee. The bartender polishes the counter, the rhythm slow and hypnotic. "Can I get you something?" she asks. "Water," you say. "No garnish." She smiles, pours it, and slides it toward you. The glass glows faintly in the dim light. You lift it and feel the cool condensation against your fingers. It's simple, clean, clear. After centuries of chaos, it feels almost sacred. You sip, and the silence settles around you like a blanket. You close your eyes, and the centuries begin to unwind behind your eyelids. You see the women of Gin Lane staggering through fog, the soldiers drinking courage from copper cups, the reformers preaching from pulpits, the distillers bending over their stills like monks at prayer. You see the riots, the fires, the sermons, the science. You see Madame Geneva herself reborn and renamed again and again, wearing every era's mask with the same smirk. Her voice lingers in the back of your mind. You can distill me, regulate me, refine me, but you'll never forget me. You smile. I don't think I want to. Outside, the sky begins to lighten at the edges. Dawn in London has a particular stillness, a fragile pause before the machines awaken, before the streets remember themselves. You step outside and breathe in the smell of wet stone and faint juniper, always juniper, eternal as regret. The street sweepers move methodically along the curb, their brooms whispering across puddles that still reflect last night's neon. A delivery boy pedals past, humming softly. A fox slips through an alley, its eyes twin embers in the pale light. The city looks almost innocent in this hour, hungover but hopeful. You walk toward the river again, the one constant witness to all of it. The Thames has carried everything: ashes, barrels, bones, prayers, and somehow never lost its shape. The water curls around the pilings, murmuring to itself in a language older than law. You rest your arms on the railing and watch the tide turn. The current catches the first light of morning, scattering it in shards. It looks for a moment like liquid glass. Historians still argue whether London ever truly learned its lesson from the gin craze. Some say yes, pointing to the laws, the reforms, the rise of a more conscious society. Others say no, that the same hunger simply moved inward, from the bottle to the bloodstream, from public ruin to private anxiety. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between, drifting like vapor. A quirky detail survives in an old diary written by a Victorian reformer. We seek purity, but are addicted to refinement itself. The line makes you smile, because it feels timeless. Whether it's gin, glory, or godliness, London never stops chasing perfection through intoxication. You watch the sunrise bloom over the rooftops, slow and deliberate. It paints the river gold, the bridges silver, and the fog a delicate rose. For a heartbeat, the city seems to forgive itself. Somewhere behind you, a clock tower tolls the hour. The sound rolls through the mist like a benediction. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. You can almost hear the heartbeat of all those who came before: the drinkers, the dreamers, the reformers, the rioters, each one believing, in their own way, that they were saving or damning the world. You imagine Madame Geneva standing beside you, watching the sunrise with her eternal half-smile. Her dress has changed again. This time it's woven from fog and glass, simple and elegant. Beautiful, isn't it? She says softly. It is. Is nest are possessed I do no joy and essay. You humans, she murmurs. You never really wanted me for my taste. You wanted me for what I made disappear. You nod. Maybe that's still true. She tilts her head, amused. And yet here you are, sober at last. For now, thinks her watching. She laughs, a sound like ice dropping into water, and begins to fade with the mist. The city wakes slowly. Trams hum, windows open. The smell of fresh bread drifts from unseen bakeries. You walk toward the heart of the waking metropolis, feeling oddly light. The hangover is gone, replaced by something gentler, not forgetfulness, but acceptance. You pass a mural painted on a brick wall, a modern reinterpretation of Gin Lane. This time, the faces aren't twisted in despair. They're serene, thoughtful, sipping modestly under soft light. The caption reads, "What we learned." You pause, tracing the words with your eyes. Maybe they're true. Or maybe London simply learned how to hide its lessons better. Either way, it feels like peace. You find yourself back in a quiet park. The grass glistens with dew. The bench is still empty. A blackbird sings somewhere unseen, its notes spiraling upward into the pale sky. You sit down, exhaling. For the first time, the city doesn't seem to need explaining. It simply exists, layered, flawed, alive. You think about how far it's come. From the squalor of gin-soaked alleys to the glass and steel skyline of modern ambition. The transformation isn't perfect, but it's human. It's what happens when a city grows up without ever outgrowing itself. You close your eyes, letting the breeze brush your face. The faintest scent of juniper drifts through the air, not overpowering now, just a whisper, a memory. "Good night, Madame Geneva," you murmur. Or maybe it's good morning. The pace softens as the light grows. You breathe deeper, slower, as though inhaling centuries of sleep. The sound of the city quiets until all that remains is the faint rustle of leaves, the gentle lap of the Thames, the distant murmur of wheels beginning their daily rhythm. You imagine the spirits of those who lived and drank and dreamed here settling too, the mothers and soldiers, the distillers and reformers, each one at rest now, their noise distilled into silence. Even Madame Geneva seems at peace, her laughter dissolved into the morning mist. You stretch, feeling the weight of the story drift from your shoulders like fog lifting from water. The world feels clearer now, not purer, perhaps, but kinder. The sharp edges of history blur into something round and soft, like the curve of a glass waiting to be filled with nothing more dangerous than light. You tell yourself you'll remember this, that even chaos can mature into calm, that every fever eventually cools, that every hangover, however brutal, teaches gentleness in its aftermath. You sit for a moment longer, breathing in the cool morning. Then you stand, tuck your hands into your coat, and walk away not from the story, but through it. The cobblestones hum beneath your feet. Somewhere far behind you, the last echo of a distant toast fades into the breeze, and with it, the city exhales.